the times that she lived through the war, and before we started she's just been telling me about one of the reasons that has made her feel it is important to record these things, and that is that there's been a thing called Holocaust hoax by an article by Dr. Rubenstein on a letter,
it was a letter actually to the Library Journal, right. Drawing attention to librarians of a book which had been offered in a complimentary way without pay to university libraries. And that book by Mr. A.R. Booth is entitled The Hoax of the 20th Century, and in a very academic disguise with plenty of footnotes and references, it sets out to prove that the Holocaust, which is the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis, was in fact a hoax concocted by Zionists and Marxists.
And of course, I guess he's meaning too that all the other people who perished in the concentration
camps. Well, of course, but that did not come up in the first letter. And but this Dr. Rubinstein, who was a visiting professor at the time, sort of wanted to make Australian librarians who are not up to date in all the facts and shades of happenings during World War II in Europe, to the fact that the Historical Review Press, which has the grandiose title of the publisher, is actually a facade for a neo-Nazi, very active neo-Nazi organization who wants to discredit the claim. Well, I didn't pay particular attention to the letter until a few months later, Dr. Bennett, who is a Melbourne solicitor, answered the letter in the most satirical terms, saying that was another proof of the complot against historical truths. And I think it was Mr. Booth, I have to look it up, who, as a second letter after Mr. Bennett's contribution, vouched for the moral integrity of the aforementioned Mr. Bennett.
Oh,
now, in the course of these letters, both of them used such expressions as it was the exterminationist lobby who pushed his claims, and made continuous reference to a very recent article by a researcher in the Observer, and quoted it with the most damning and damaging quotes against the Holocaust fact. Now, being a librarian and preferably a reference librarian, I was incensed, although I was incensed by the letters, I thought I better make sure of my facts first. And with great effort and expense, I got myself an airmail copy of the Observer.
Right.
And in the reading the airmail copy, I noticed, to my great astonishment, or I shouldn't have been surprised really, that the quotes were all taken out of context. You know, in the same way that you can prove that the Bible says there is no God if you cut off what was said before and after. And the author of the Observer article actually condemned these very same neo-Nazis. And in her article she stressed she was so much for the facts and facts only that she condemned the fictionalized accounts which sprung up because that could be proved not to be true literally. Also the sense of it was true, but literally not true. They also quoted from that, again out of context. Now, I wrote a letter to the Library Journal, which they published. This was my first becoming aware of the fact that people who have survived this experience should not let other people to forget or distort what happened. And actually it has always been my stance on the matter, personal stance, that I have forgiven as far as it is possible, but I don't want to forget it because I don't want this to happen again. It's probably something. So the letter, if you are interested, before entering the debate, inverted commas, concerning the Holocaust. Yes, it's here, actually. Oh, it's here. So the letter, I just found it. The John Bennett from Carlton, Victoria, wrote, amongst other things, that in fact he donated the Boots book. I am not a member of the Ku Klux Klan, because that's what he compared it to, but have been secretary of the Victorian Council for Civil Liberties since 1966 and have been actively opposed to censorship for several decades. Dr. Rubinstein's concern about a book challenging the Holocaust is understandable, for he has stated that were the Holocaust to be shown to be a hoax, the number one weapon in Israel's propaganda armory disappears. Perhaps librarians should allow readers to decide whether Israel's number one propaganda weapon disappears. I mean, it has nothing to do really with propaganda. I would like to bring some more disturbing and unpleasant news to Dr. Rubinstein's attention, and good news for librarians. I am the Australian representative of the Institute for Historical Review and will shortly be circularizing all libraries with a list of publications available from the Institute. The books which the Institute will make available are effectively banned by trade boycott here, and no self-respecting book dealer will touch them, obviously. And then this, it wasn't Dr. Boots, but Louis Brandon, who is the director of the Institute for Historical Review in California, USA, he wrote, and he said that I have monitored with some interest the correspondence regarding the Holocaust in your publication. I had the pleasure of meeting John Bennett at our 1979 revisionist convention at Los Angeles and was very highly impressed with his integrity, courage, and intelligence. It would seem that at long last the exterminationist lobby are having to trim their sails. In the British New Statesman see how weak my memory is, that's not a thing to say, of the 2nd November 1979, Ms. Gitta Schering admits that Auschwitz, despite its emblematic name, was not primarily an extermination camp for Jews and is not the central case through which to study extermination policy. I will come back to this sentence. This would seem to be the next logical step in the exterminationist retreat, for just after the war they claimed that all the camps were for gassing Jews. Then in 1960 they admitted that the camps in Germany proper did not have gas chambers, only the camps in Poland did. Now they are saying that Auschwitz was not the main extermination center. Cherno, Belzec, Sobibor and Treblinka were. However, no one can forensically check this claim, obviously. There is no physical trace that these camps ever existed, as the sites are just plain fields. This is true. Later in the same article, Mrs. Schering states that the orchestra at Auschwitz played when slave laborers marched to and from work, and not to the gas chambers, he says. Ms. Schering goes on to admit that many survivor testimonies are fakes. Now that's again quoted out of. She says that she herself was approached to have Martin Gray write for Those I Loved about his escape from Treblinka, which place he had manifestly never been to. She likewise pens Steiner's Treblinka as being pure fiction, incredibly remaining nonetheless in serious biographies. It is this habit of fictional novels turning up in historical reference book. Ms. Schering gives the example herself of Martin Gilbert's Final Journey, which the Institute for Historical Review has set out to correct. History books should be about the facts, not about fantasy. I would recommend Ms. Schering's article to any readers interested in bringing history into accord with the facts. See, that sounds a very good article. Well, I read it. And of course, to go back to the points, when it said that there were not extermination camps, well, extermination camps in Nazi terminology were those where people did not stay and work at all. They came there and were exterminated. And we can discuss the method, and of course not everywhere was the process highly industrialized, but was at the beginning, apparently, people were just shot by the thousands.
Yes.
And of course, later, once an once an extermination camp served its purpose, they were demolished. There was no building, people didn't live there. There was demolished, and it is shown, and there is a whole research, I suppose it is a depository of archives in Germany where you can go and look for the facts. And these places, they wanted to revert it to fields, arable land, and actually there is documentation that they paid farmers who didn't want to go back there to go back there and work. So there is no trace.
Right.
But that is not the point. So what I did, I read Ms. Sheren's article, and as I said before, she wanted the fiction out of the facts because of its confusing possibilities. But she said she was against the whole propaganda which they represent. So what I wrote was, before entering the debate concerning the Holocaust, and I cite inside 119, 25th January 1980, I did read Gitta Sheren's article in the New Statesman, that was on the 2nd of November 1979, which had been quoted, or rather misquoted, by Louis Brandon. Not unexpectedly, I found that by citing passages out of context, preceded by the loaded word admitted, because he said she admitted, she didn't admit, she stated. Louis Brandon twisted the thrust of Sheren's statements, not admissions, which demolished the neo-Nazi apologists who, and I quote, regardless of mountains of evidence, regardless of the living witnesses, harp on their obsessional claim that there was no Holocaust, no gas chambers, not to speak of anyway. Librarians should read the New Statesman's article, if only to get a better understanding of that universe of oppression and death that was the network of concentration camps, Konzentrationslager, and extermination camps, Vernichtungslager. There were two different things throughout the Third Reich, and their varying degrees of methodical crazy slaughter. They would learn that far from admitting errors or falsehoods, Gitta Sheren sets out to counter the neo-Nazi pseudo-historians' ridiculous claims by offering a clear distinction of facts and fiction. As a librarian, I cannot but entirely agree with her closing statement, which understandably was not quoted by Brandon. Always, the proper reply to this dishonorable man, meaning the neo-Nazi apologist, begins with knowledge. I am not, to use one of Brandon's charming expressions, of the exterminationist lobby. Why is it that opponents to their propaganda always have to justify themselves, and by the grace of God was not among the exterminated? But I must say that I am outraged at the line of argument which seems to center on the dispute of whether or not camps in Germany or only those in Poland or used gas chambers for killing Jews. Concentration camps in Germany and in its occupied territories caused the death of millions of people, not only Jews by any means, by torture and brutality, and simply by hunger, sickness, and unimaginably inhuman conditions. Methodical executions and mass killings are proven facts. Any regime which approved and organized the deportation, systematized dehumanization and death of millions by the means employed by the Third Reich cannot but be totally condemned and rejected, irrespective of the topography, mode, and number of the atrocities committed. If historical review consists of a clever mixing of lies and truths and of denial of unpalatable facts, then the results of such reviews, be they propaganda pamphlets or closed in the language of academe, are travesties of truth and knowledge. Librarians ought not to be sidetracked by diversional arguments put forward by the propagators of such material. Those publications have no place in a library. So that's what I wrote, and I published it. And that was it, yes.
Good.
But you see, this was perhaps the first thing, ever since I've been in Australia, which showed me that
it was necessary
these
not to
issues are not dead.
No.
And whilst I have never been harping on them, I thought it might be important to clamp, whenever such a thing happened, to protest. And that is why I'm writing to the Herald, because even an excess of imagery should be corrected.
Well, I think it's an excellent idea, and I'm pleased that you've agreed to talk to me. And let's start by talking about where you grew up and how things were before.
All right. Well, here is a autobiography. Well, I grew up in Budapest. I was born in Budapest. My father was an accountant employed by a bank. My mother was a dressmaker who worked very hard all her life. We lived in very simple circumstances. I had a sister who was 5 years younger than I am. And I know that my parents always had trouble to make ends meet and bridge over the end of the month, because salaries were paid once a month. But we had a very harmonious home. And my father was a very humane and humanistic person and loved books and music. And I grew up, my mother had a very nice voice. I don't know why I remember that, but I grew up amongst singing people, and I think that is a great help. I have no voice and I can't sing, unfortunately. And I still remember, and perhaps this is pertinent here, as a childhood memory, by the way, all right, I finished this, but I have to look at the oven too.
Just turn it
as a childhood memory, that Sunday mornings were always the mornings late in bed, and when we were small children, we always climbed into the big bed of my parents. And the great thing about Sunday mornings was that my father talked about his war experiences, because he was twice wounded in the First World War, and he was prisoner of war in Russia for nearly 2 years. And his experiences were fantastic, and he sang songs, soldier songs, and he told us about his escape and all that, and it seemed fantastic, far away, and how terrible it was when he was wounded, and all that. He had a leg wound and the arm, he was shot through the arm once.
And this was all on the Russian front, was it?
Well, yes, well, Hungary was fighting, yes, he was on the Russian front. And he was a telephonist, so he always was very happy about the fact that he himself never ever used a weapon in his life. And later on, with hindsight, he even used to tell me afterwards how little his sufferings were compared to what women or children went through during the Second World War. So anyway, I was a fairly good student. I liked studies, and well, I don't know how far I have to go into autobiographical details.
Tell me what you were studying.
Well, I went to high school and I coached, and that's how I kept afloat in a way. So very early in the piece, and my mother instilled in us an interest in other people and an interest in other lands. So it was always our aim to be able to travel one day. Little did I know that I would travel that far. Yes. And I remember when I first coached, I was only about 12 or 13, and I got my first, dollar, let us say, it was florins, pengers in those days, and I came home and wanted to give it to my mother, and she said, no, you put it in the saving banks because that would help you to travel one day. And I did travel actually when I was 16. I spent a summer in Austria with a family and later. So that was perhaps the childhood influences.
Were you a religious family?
Well, yes and no. We were not religious. You see, my father was Jewish, but what I call, I think, progressive Jews or whatever, so it's not very strict of strict. And his father was the same, who was a lovely man. My paternal grandfather was the loveliest of men. He was a teacher, used to be, when he was young, a village teacher and a very poor man, but a very always optimistic, always enjoying life and the wonders which life held. And he was my great friend. Even he died at the age of 84, and I was at first year uni student, I think, at that stage. And he was a friend, really, you know. Well, they were not religious. My grandfather observed the New Year feast, and I think it was the fast, which is after the New Year, but nothing else. My mother was a landowner's daughter. She came from a totally different background. She was not religious at all, at all. She had no religious feeling. I was very religious. I was brought up in the Catholic religion, and I was very, very religious. My father was a bit worried about me, actually. He thought I was going to excess.
Being brought up in a Catholic religion.
But he was worried about me because you know, I was really excessively
I was an excessive evangelical child at 14, so I can understand.
Well, my daughter is now, so you see it's coming back, and I'm worried about her. And I think, what do I do?
Ditto with guys.
Is it?
Yes. I think it's a stage we obviously go through.
Perhaps.
Anyway, how old were you? No, wait a minute.
This is a touchy thing. I never give away my age, but I was old. I mean, I was,
You started at the university.
I started at the university, and that was rather a feat, because in those days, you see, the climate changed. And in 1937, they brought in the first Jewish laws, that I call. But people get used to it, and people are always optimistic and thought it couldn't be worse than that. And also we were deaf and dumb, willingly, because we were very near Germany and things were happening there, and yet people didn't think it could happen at our place. And I even remember in 1938, when Austria was overrun by Hitler, we never thought it could happen in Hungary, anything like that. And I was very patriotic. That was our upbringing, probably. I was, you know, very nationalist in outlook, and I thought that the Trianon Treaty was the greatest tragedy, where Hungary was chopped off. Actually, my father was a royalist, so he felt it was a tragedy that the Austro-Hungarian Empire was disappeared. And I wanted to be a teacher. That was my aim, and which was in those days a.
Did you look at your oven?
No, I haven't.
You were just about to tell me that you wanted to be a teacher.
Yes, I wanted to be a teacher because I loved explaining things to people, and well, actually, I earned my living or my expenses, you see, by tutoring. And I remember when I prepared for the leaving certificate, I had 13 students. And I remember the teacher of maths, you know, the maths teacher, called my mother in when he heard about it, and he said that I would finish up with a nervous breakdown and fail my exam, most probably. But I said no, because I learned. That was the best way of learning. So anyway, I didn't. I did very well, actually, which I needed for survival.
You needed a scholarship.
Because I needed to be admitted to university. Because you see, in Hungary there was a numerus clausus, which means closed numbers.
Yes.
And those who qualified as Jews were not admitted. Only in a number, a percentage of the total students could be. And of course, the
very small percentage.
Very small percentage.
So you had to be extra good to creep in.
Extra good, or have extra influence somewhere, or whatever. Well, I didn't have any influence, but I was apparently good enough. Now, I was not admitted to the college teacher training university, like the Sydney University, DPED, BA, whatever. It was a different structure. And I was not admitted, and the family council sat about, and I had a very humanistic upbringing. Even in the school I learned Latin and languages, and I had no idea about commerce or anything like that. And then the family council decided, and I concurred in a way, that the only university where I would have a chance is the economics.
Right. The only course.
The only course, but it was a special school of economics in another university, where I was admitted. And I remember I had weeks of despair when I started. I didn't even understand the language. It was totally, they talked about checks and things, and I didn't even know what they were, and it was dreadful. But then I got used to it and liked maths, mathematics and things like that. And then I realized after a few years that if I have another year, I could become a teacher, get a teacher's DPED in commercial topics, which I did. Well, I didn't do that until after the war, because the war came. Anyway, I had a scholarship, which was the only way, and I was tutoring this time at the uni, my fellow students in maths and things. And I went through, and I even got a scholarship to France, which was absolutely unheard of, because summer, and I remember my maths prof said that was, he didn't believe in it himself, that I got it. He doesn't understand, because, he would have approved, but that under the, you had your religion in your university book, which you had to show at every exam, but you also had to have your father's religion. So, it was always dicey. Anyway, I got a scholarship, but then war broke out. And I came back, that was in 1939, and I came back with great difficulty, but of course I wanted to come home.
So how long were you there?
Only the summer months.
I see.
I was there in the summer of 1939.
In Paris, was it?
No, it was near Grenoble. I got it too late to be admitted to the university home, and the directress, this has nothing much to do, perhaps it has, she wrote back to me and said she can't give me a place because everything is taken, but if I don't mind doing physical work, she has a friend who has a university home, for students and graduates in the mountains, in the Alps, and they don't take foreigners, but if I want to become a cleaning maid, they may take me. And I said, yes, why not? And I wrote, and they accepted me, and that was perhaps the most wonderful experience in my whole life. These people were absolutely extraordinary. They were very much practicing Christians, Catholics, but it had a different flavor from that of Hungary, where they were always patronizing, and I felt I was cheating them, I remember. And one day they were reading, I don't know what we were doing, and I told the lady who was the head, who was a fantastic woman, she lost a leg when she was 16. A tram, she fell under a tram. And she continued. She was the first agricultural engineer woman in France. And she taught in agricultural colleges by crawling because she had a very crude artificial leg, and she was a fantastic person. And I sort of thought, I can't be dissimulating. I must tell her that I'm of Jewish origin. You see, that was the atmosphere in Hungary. So I went in sort of and confessed. And I will never forget, she looked at me and she said, I do envy you, you know. I said, what? So she must have been. She said, I will never be as near to Christ as you will. And I said, oh, that's not true. That's how they were. So it was a very good experience of my life. And also, you know, when when I was liberated, I sent through the Red Cross, I sent a message to them too.
How lovely.
And you know that I set out, one of the people, the sub-directress there, went to a mission and they tried to locate me in Germany after the war. So they were fantastic people, really.
So you left there and went back home?
I went back home when the war broke out, and it was a very eventful journey because of course it was already war. And I was there. I continued my university studies, and the law became more and more restrictive, obviously. And then in 1944, when I come to think of it, when all the West knew practically that the war was won, we were still. That's when, you know, the Nazism swept Hungary.
Now, why was that? Was that because they'd been too busy before then cleaning up the rest of it, and they only got to you then?
No, it was because we were allies of the Germans,
right.
And the Hungarians were used by the Germans.
Right.
The Hungarian armies went to the West, and all those terrible campaigns in the Ukraine, and the Hungarians were part of it. But by that time, the Hungarian armies were cleaned by Jews, and they were sent into work camps, which were the most terrible experiences, actually. And in spite of everything that happened, we were rather protected. Perhaps we didn't want to know, I think.
So your family, for instance, carried on their normal
They carried on their normal business. My father continued working. My mother did some work, you know, as a dressmaker, and my sister went to school. We knew there wasn't any hope for her to go into uni, and she loved music and she loved things like that, so it was rather bad. But life continued, and people always thought that that would be the last of the restrictions. You know, people get used to it.
Did you feel the rest of the Hungarian population were getting more anti-Jewish, or?
Oh yes.
Oh
yes.
Yeah.
And also, you see, at uni, of course, you know, to give you just a taste what a university was in Hungary, and that was like that from the 20s. It didn't have to come, Hitler to come. But come September, the school year started in September, the academic year started in September, and the first 3-4 weeks went by, and then came the Jew beatings. That was part of the university year. And then the right-aligned students came and set upon the Jewish students and beat them up.
And nobody said anything was stopping.
No, you couldn't. You see? And Nick was beaten up, and he jumped out of the window. But his dean was a very good man, and his son was Nick's friend. And when I came home and he heard about it from other sources, because Nick didn't go surely, he asked his son, "What did you do?" And he said, "Nothing." He couldn't have done anything. He said, he banned his son from his table for days. You know, he was really a very nice man. But that was
So that's
the exception, but that was the climate. That was the atmosphere. 2 months later, the very same people who set upon you and beat you are probably asked for you to help. You know, that was the climate. You see? Now, ladies were not, girls were not beaten, they were just asked to leave. But it was the fear, the chanting mob, you know. I have a terrible fear of the mob, even to this day. It was terrible. And they were nice people. I wouldn't say everybody was like that. But as always, the loud activists carried the day.
And the others didn't actually speak up or...
No, you couldn't. You were labelled something else. And as it got... And then don't misunderstand, there were quite a large number of nice people. And I had friends who were nice. I belonged... But there was always a bit of, at least a bit of patronizing of making an exception to accept you. You see? You were really not in the fabric of society, much as I did belong, I felt. And I became now I couldn't become officially an assistant. Any rank at the university was barred, you see. But the professor of education, he was fantastic. And I still remember his words, because they were revolutionary words in those days in Hungary, because he said that to be a Hungarian is not an accident of birth or race or religion. It is the community of feelings. I still remember his words. And that was revolutionary. That was practically revolutionary in those days. And I thought, yes, this is my vocation. I want to educate future generations, and you know, I felt like this. And then 44 came, and I started the teacher training course at the uni. And at the same time, I was offered, and this is practically unexplainable, I was offered a black market post of teaching, or how should I explain? I mean, officially, I couldn't have taught.
Yes.
Because by that time, according to the law, I was considered a Jew, and I couldn't have got any position. But I was offered in a school, a religious school, which had after the leaving certificate, they had a 2-year secretarial course, but it was a very, very high standard course, because you had to have 2 foreign languages apart from Hungarian. You had to learn foreign correspondence, you know, commercial correspondence, shorthand in all those languages, economics. You know, they really wanted to become the highest degrees, private secretary or whatever. And in that course they offered me a teaching post.
Goodness.
And it was a very exclusive school, actually, the Notre Dame de Sion. It was a French order. And I loved it. I loved teaching. And it's hard to believe now, but I was very young, and I always looked younger than my years. And I remember when I first went in, the start of the year, I thought it was a hoax, that I was one of the students who played the teacher, because they were not strictly after, 18 was the age, but not everybody came straight after. And so it was great fun, and became great friends with my class, and but that was the crucial year. Oh, that was in 43, of course, and then 43, 44, because the academic year went through, and then on March 19th, 44, the Germans invaded Hungary, because you see the Prime Minister, Count Teleki, who was incidentally professor at my university, professor of geography, who was a man of great integrity and had a very nationalist feeling of what Hungary should do or should not do. And we made a non-aggression pact with Yugoslavia. And only days after that, Germany demanded that Hungary opens the routes for them to invade Yugoslavia, and Teleki opposed. And the Germans invaded Hungary. Teleki sort of committed suicide, which was not suicide, and we knew it straight away because he was a very devout Catholic. He couldn't have committed suicide. Anyway, he was put out of the way, and they invaded Yugoslavia and invaded Hungary at the same time. And then came the hard times. Well, that was the beginning of the tragic times. Very soon afterwards, they started the deportation of Jews to Germany from the country. As a first thing, of course, I'm just trying to think back, the first thing was that the Secret Service took the prominent leftish figures, and everybody who they thought would be a danger, however minimally, to them, and they were taken, the big Jewish industrialists, the leftists, or communists were banned in Hungary, so that didn't count, but even the socialists, straight away. And we knew then, or half knew, that there were political concentration camps in Germany, and Dachau obviously was one of them. And those people were taken to Dachau. This was a man's it started out as a political camp. And they were taken there. And then in the months, that was in March, and then as it went on in June, July, I forgot now the exact dates, I should have asked Nick first. Well, when the Germans invaded, all the school practically finished, because all those who were Jewish went home, which was actually a fatal mistake, from the country. They went home. I advised my pupils to go home to their families, because life became uncertain in the capital, and people were taken in the street and things like that. So school finished in any case, and dissolved, should I say. And I continued living at home, and then one day, as things started to become worse, I was approached by the directress or headmistress of the school, who was a lovely, lovely nun, and Mary Yolan, and she told me that a Catholic priest he was also the director of a school for girls, sort of a commercial school for girls, and from the country mostly, so they had a live-in college type of thing in, Budapest is Buda and Pest, in Buda, and that this father, Klinda, opened this college for people who feared persecution, and that Mary Olan thought that I should go there. And of course people started to go underground, people who had any sense, not me, because we never thought of doing anything which wasn't legal, very law-abiding family. And I thought, why go there? Oh yes, you should inquire. And I went there, and he was really a saint, and he thought, yes, you should come. And by that time, there were war factories or war things established in Hungary, and those who worked for the war effort were exempted from part of the restrictive anti-Jewish laws. And actually I started working in such a factory which did military, the stars? I remember this. It was a terrible job. You had to wind that golden or silver thread around these star-shaped things. Terrible job. Anyway, I was working in there when he said that he would establish also a war factory making military trousers and shirts. I said, but I can't sew. Oh, never mind. So I went along there, and I remember my first job was I saw the string which went into the underpants, and I saw miles and miles of string which taught me how to use a sewing machine. And it was an odd crowd there. This is a deviation, really. It was an absolutely odd crowd there, some families, because his principle was that when Jesus called people, he didn't select. And he wouldn't select, because sometimes these people are not worth saving or something. He didn't select. So who came first until we had the capacity were taken. And I made some friendships which lasted as long as the people lasted there. Now, the head, you needed to have a leader. There was a teacher. They were all what they called Aryans. There was a lady who was a teacher who was the economist, who handled the administration and the feeding of all these people. And the factory also needed a leader. And that was my great friend, Gita Malas. Gita Malas was the daughter of a general. And so absolutely right as far as her family and upbringing. I mean, right, also acceptable, eminently acceptable. On top of that, she was of German origin, so it was even more acceptable. But she was an artist. She was, first, she was a swimming champion, ex-swimming champion, and one of the greatest graphic artists in Hungary. And her partner in this work, everybody knew her drawings and etchings. And her great partner and friend was Hannah, who was a Jewish woman. I mean, Jewish by law, she was really, I have here her etchings about, like a series of etchings, which is an illustration of Our Father, the prayer, and it's beautiful. Anyway, and Gita accepted to become the head of the war factory, or whatever you call it, war plant, and she brought in two of her friends whom she wanted to protect us, and they were Hannah and Lily. Lily was a gymnastics teacher, but she was far more than that. She taught relaxation. She was the most fantastic human being I have ever met in my life. All of three of them were, but Lily was my ideal as human beings ought to be. And she was a skiing champion. She was a fantastic person, always relaxed and always happy to help somebody else. And she was absolutely fantastic. Anyway, we made friends. That was a very special atmosphere in this place. And as things got worse outside, we sort of got sheltered from the outside, perhaps sheltered so that we were not aware of what was going on. And things were going on because when the Hungarian Nazis took power, then atrocities started all over the place. And the radio blared all day long that if anybody helps so much as talks to a Jew will be executed, and they were. And our administrator went out one day. What happened one morning, there were Nazi action groups, and one of them was, I'm ashamed to say, was led by a priest. He was a mental case, I'm sure, because he had his sutan, his priestly garb, and you have this sort of a belt, and the belt was studded with hand grenades, and on the sutan he had the swastika, and and he came in and took us all and marched us towards the Nazi house, which was the place of torture. And anyway, what happened, it's a long story, I cut it short. that one of the girls who was hiding there, I mean, we were not hiding, we were officially there. She had a boyfriend who was in the Italian embassy, that's another Axis power, and he happened to ring her. And the word of these Nazis were, when they held us, that anybody who rings up should come, because I wanted to capture that person too. And she told him, the young man, please come. And he was a bit surprised. But then, before he hung up, she said aiuto, which I thought was meant adieu, goodbye, but it means help in Italian. So he knew something was amiss and started ringing Father Klinder, who wasn't there. Anyway, in short, they started things moving, and when we got halfway, we were marched towards the hills. And when we got halfway, a very high up Hungarian military unit came and made them all turn back and turn us back. And they made all these Nazi louts, who were all in these pseudo-military uniforms. Father Klinder waited for us at the gate, and he took us all into the chapel and made all the Nazi louts kneel down and give grace for our liberation. And of course, if we had any ounce of sense, we should have fled from the place, and some did. Those who didn't have any sense, like he would truly stayed. But I wasn't the hiding type anyway, probably. And then on the 1st of December 1944, they came back for us. But before they came back, and that's the last thing I say, one day Elizabeth, who was the administrator, she went out to do some shopping because she was the only one who could go out. And this Father Kuhn captured her. And she told the subalterns when she was caught that if a Jew escapes, it's bad for you. But if this woman escapes, because she sheltered Jews, then you will all be killed. And for months, we didn't, for weeks, for long weeks, in spite of the efforts of Father Klinder, we didn't know where she was. And then with a magical help, she was ready for deportation. She bribed somebody to ring a number, and that's how, because in the meantime, Father Klinder got an affidavit or whatever to liberate her instantly, but he didn't know where she was. No. Anyway, she got liberated like that. But we should have known that he wanted vengeance, that father, that Nazi priest. And he did. And he came back and marched us all off.
Including the people who were running it and weren't
only the No, what happened, that when the Nazi whoever came in, now that's another side thing, whether we will want the quiche burnt or not, another side thing, like Gitta being the head of the war plant, the next cottage or villa or whatever was requisitioned by the Gestapo, and the Gestapo heartily despised the Hungarian Nazis as being inferior louts. And Gitta being a German, and she had some German, don't know what, praise for her work or something, for her artwork, she struck up a friendship with the Gestapo high man there, so that he made a little gate built between our fence, and he said, if anything is amiss and the Hungarian Nazi louts come in and threaten you, you can come over this fence. Now what happened on that fatal morning of the 1st of December, that Gitta was there, Gitta is a Hungarian nickname for Margaret, was there, and Father Klinder was there, and the head of this division which wanted to take us away went in, and they started talking to them and explaining why we shouldn't be taken. In the meantime, Gitta knew that the SS men will come good, and she, procrastinated willingly to make it longer so that we can escape. And quite a number of girls escaped, actually all but 16 escaped. And amongst the 16 were her best friends, Hannah Lily, and myself, because we thought with a false, it was false in those times, that we don't want her to suffer for our escape. And incidentally, when the Nazi commando sent us and said, you can pack you know, a little bundle to take with you. What do you think I took with me? I took my graduate papers to show what I have, and my passport. Being legalistic all the time, typical. No, of course not. Yes, but I mean, what a thing. Anyway, so we were taken away. It was 16 of us. Were taken away, and I remember Gita and the Father Klinda came out to say goodbye to us, and the last words of his were that you can be assured. I was promised, but of course, like all promises, they were not empty. We were promised that under no circumstances will you be taken out of Hungary. And even if I have to wear my fingers to the bone, I will dig you out again. And he really meant it, of course. And then we were taken with thousands and thousands of others, as we realized, to a brick plant, you know, brick making plant, where we spent an evening, a night, crowded, you know, just tossing down. And the next morning we were taken to the central station and loaded into cattle trucks.
And what was your health like at this point?
Oh yes, well, you may know that I had polio when I was a child, and I had several operations, and I wore orthopedically made shoes. But otherwise I was active in sport. I was part of the competition swimming team, and I loved bushwalking. So I was in good form, good condition. Nevertheless, I had a handicap.
Yeah, right.
My friends, those two of my friends and the other 16, they were mostly much better physically, much better off than I was. Now, in those cattle trucks we were shoved in, and we were about 90 in a truck, which is a terrible number. And you could see straight away, and the truck went out of the station, and you could see straight away how the veneer of civilization falls off people as soon as unprecedented inhuman circumstances come into operation. But we had something going for us. We were all very deeply religious, and we had an ideal, and we had our friendship. And we started looking at this whole adventure as sent upon us so as to learn from it. And so we endured the 3 days of traveling, and we arrived, and I don't know how detailed fashion I should say, we got into Germany, and we traveled on and on and on.
Well, all this time, had you had any food and
yes,
water?
We got food and we got water at intervals, but of course no amenities. There was a bucket, I guess, and we had our own clothes still, and we were there. And then all of a sudden, after 3 days at night, the train came to a halt, and I still remember it very vividly. It was a nightmarish landscape. It was all dark, only big spotlights illuminated the siding. It was no station, it was just the siding. And along the platform were SS women with enormous Alsatian hounds straining at the leash. And they barked, you know, aussteigen, and we stumbled out of that confined stay truck to be met by the winter. And that was Ravensbrück. That was beyond Berlin. That was to the north of Berlin. And snow-covered, barren landscape. There was nothing there. I still remember that, how should I say, it was unreal. It was a barren nothingness, dark, with snow on the ground, those dark silhouettes of the SS women and the dogs, which we didn't know. I wasn't afraid of them then. And we had to move at a brisk pace, and we moved into a big camp. It was a big stone, I mean, we barely saw it then, fence, double, triple fence actually. And then we got into an enormous tent, but absolutely enormous, you know, I don't know, but thousands of us got in. And we were compressed in that tent, and I still remember that was the first time I experienced the terror of masses, you know, of mass humanity. We were so compressed that when you stood, you automatically started swaying. You couldn't stand still. And we were swaying in that thing, standing, because that was only standing space at the beginning. And people who fainted and became hysterical, you know, and all that. And then all of a sudden, somebody came in, I don't know if it was an SS, maybe it was, and also probably a prisoner, and said that, welcomed us, so to say, and said that this was a place where if you behaved well and worked well, you had a good life, but the slightest indiscipline will be punished. So we better be good. And if we are good, we will be treated well. If we are bad, we will be treated badly. And that's how our life in Ravensbrück started. And then we were taken to the, I think, I'm just vague about it, next morning. Oh, and I remember we were given mugs, metal mugs, and I said that we get food in the morning. And I remember that we were given, and the tent had flaps, you know, and we were given some terrible smelling food, which we could not, soupy thing, which smelled of, and I don't know what it is, it's a sort of a turnip which they feed the cattle with.
Mayors or something.
No, I don't know what it smells evil. And that was it. And I remember we couldn't eat it. And all of a sudden, some nightmarish creatures appeared at the flap of the tent, risking their lives, as it were, as we learned later, and asked us to give them what we can't eat. And me, prim little middle-class girl, I said, but I have already eaten out of this mug. You know, you just don't give it, you know, or beat into this piece. Said, don't you worry, just give it to us. I gave it away, couldn't eat it. But then we learned to eat it. And then the next day or after, we were taken to sort of a bath, and we were given, we had to put down our clothes, we had to put down all our belongings, and all we could keep was a comb, a toothbrush, which was an absolute luxury anyway, a toothbrush, and nothing else. And we were given new clothes. By that time, they didn't have all those prisoner gear, so what we got was clothes taken from others. And of course it happened to be mostly summer things in winter, but that didn't help much. Anyway, we were given clothes, and I remember I was taken away my shoes, and I was given enormous Dutch wooden clogs sort of thing. And I even remember the heel was missing, so it went like that. And
did you have underclothes?
Yes, I think we had. Yes, we had an something. Yes, and a dress, and I even had a sort of a coat-like thing. And everybody's hair was shorn, except my friend's Hannah. She had beautiful blonde hair, beautiful, coming down. And the woman who did the sharing was so impressed by her hair that she said, oh, I just cut a bit of it and you can keep it. And she looked at it as a good omen, sort of, you know, that she was spared this. And we were Now, Ravensbrück at the time, as we discovered later, was a women's camp with fluctuating population. At the highest time when we were there, when the concentration camp population came to a bursting point, there were about 80,000 women there, of all nationalities. There were, next, not far from us, was a French block, where French women of the resistance were taken. There were the oldest population of these camps, political, was Polish, because when they overran Poland, they took the Polish women. There were Greek women, there were a lot of gypsies, Russians, there were a few English, I met a few English girls who got caught somewhere, Hungarian Jews, and of course there was the mixed prison population of Germany, because the hellish setup of these camps was that it was a mix-up of political prisoners, religious or racial persecutions, and ordinary criminals, or those who were considered criminal by the Nazi law, such as Seventh-day Adventists. You see, in Ravensbrück, you had on your sleeve, on your left sleeve, you had a triangle and a little stripe. And the color of the triangle signified the crime for which you were here. Red was political. But if that red was with another red triangle, another yellow triangle made it Jewish. Political. If it was black, you were a murderess. If it was, I think deep mauve was the religious thing. And then it was prostitute was yet another color. I forgot the colors. But once you knew the colors, you could orient yourself. On top of that, everybody, I forgot to tell you that when we gave in our belongings, like they took our jewelry, like if you had a ring or a watch, but with German methodical organization, we were given a receipt for all they took, which was of no value whatsoever, but never mind, you had a receipt. And you were given a number. We were not tattooed, like they were notaries, but we were given a number, and you wore that number on your sleeve under the sign. Now, as setups go, the prison was guarded by SS, women SS, but the hierarchy of the camp was made up by prisoners. Those prisoners who did serve, in a way, the Germans, and who were willing to undertake the policing and shepherding of the other prisoners. Now, those were the most hardened prisoners who wanted to survive or who had no scruples whatsoever. And that means that every block, they called those buildings, every block had a head, block Älteste. And then ours were all Polish, nearly all, so they were Blockowa, all in Polish. And then all the room, elderly, and this and that. It was a whole hierarchy. Now these people had the power. And the more they used and abused their power, the more they assured their own life and food. And food meant life and survival. And I remember, because Lily was so athletic, she was offered to become a policewoman in the camp, and she declined, because a policewoman you had to beat the others, beat them into obedience. And she refused. But you can't expect such heroism of everybody, obviously. So we were thrust into this terribly big block, which is like a wooden building, like you see, the army blocks. But each side housed 1,000 women. Now, how could it house 1,000 women? It was very simple. There was an entrance where you walked in and out. And then came what they called the bathroom. They were facilities which you could never use because all the dignitaries in the block took hold of that room, and that was their private room, you see. And they had a little stove there, and they cooked there and lived there. And there came the main block, the main big thing, and you went in, like you would come in here, and it was I don't know how many, along the width, beds, top tiers of beds. There were 3 up and about 4 or 5 deep. And that was in 3 up, 4 width, and like 5 deep. That was big masses of beds. And then there was a corridor, and then came another. And in every bed, there were 4 people. Yes. And we had a straw mattress or whatever it was, that was it. And we slept like this, you know, all dressed. Of course, you never change your clothes. I was in Ravensbrück. Well, I arrived the beginning of December. I was taken on the 1st, it was about the 6th, 7th December. And I left Ravensbrück in February. And I never had a bath, and I never had a change of clothes. But that was winter, fortunately. And there were also latrines. Now, because of the food, now you had to climb into bed, but unfortunately, as people weakened, they couldn't control themselves. And when you were not on the top, on top you had to climb up. That was difficult when you became weaker. When you were at the bottom, you suffered the consequences, and you suffered the constant pressure and nightmare of thousands of people in bodily contact, practically, with all their, all manners stripped away, practically. And I remember when they brought the food in big containers once a day, there was a scramble with our mugs, and you had to fight to get there. And I remember I didn't get off my bed. And I said, I can't do that. I just lost all. It was such an alien environment that I lost all, and many did, all will to fight. What do you fight for? I can't. And then my friends came to my rescue. Really, I owe my life to them, because I remember that Lily and Hannah said, look, we have a mission in life. We want to go back. We want to teach the young generation so that such things cannot happen. And we should look at this as a spectacle. We are spectators. They can't hurt us. I still remember. And we have to fight to survive, and we will survive with this. I didn't. That's not the point. And that's how they really, if they hadn't been with me in those first days, I'm sure I wouldn't have survived, because I just couldn't. I couldn't go out and fight. But then I did, not fight, but, I took up my courage and I pushed myself in to get that terrible thing, and we got a piece of what I euphemistically called bread, which was like a brick, and it was made mostly straw. And once a week we got, I don't know how many grams of margarine once a week, and once a week a piece of sausage. Now, food was much more value than gold or anything else, because that was the only way to survive. And unfortunately, people stole. Obviously, you want to survive at all costs, you take the food where you get it. So everybody sooner or later made or got himself a little bag, made out of material, which you hang into your neck, and that's where you put the bread and everything, because that was the only place where you could feel if somebody came and wanted to take it. So that was I don't know, I'm just saying what comes into my mind. Now, there were other nights, if this wasn't enough. And of course, very soon we became dirty. you had to go steal in to escape the what do you call that thing you hit the dogs with, or whatever.
All those whips and
The whip of the block of us. You had to steal in at the dead of night to get a trickle of water and wash yourself.
And because this
see?
is where they lived.
That's where they lived. They had a good love. They had good food. You see, they cooked the food. And you became dirty. And of course, then the SS women, when they saw what they said, "You dirty swine." We were always called dirty swine. You verlau, and of course we started having lice. And of course you verlauste Schweinhunde. That's terrible. Anyway, and so we started life in Ravensbrück. Now, life, if you can call it that, was another thing. It was work. And life started at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock at night, in the dead of night. The block of our or whatever other dignitaries would come in and shout, "Get up, get up." It's appel. Appel is the, I don't know what you say in English when you count people. You know, in a review, roll call. Thank you. Appel time. And you had to line up in the dead of winter and dead of night in Ravensbrück, starting at 4 o'clock, because by the time all the 8,000 women were lined up in rows of 5, each block full, it was time for the SS to come. That means we had about 4 hours standing every night. And that was a terrible nightmare. And people who dropped dead there, they dropped dead. And those who you know, you had to be taken part in.
And you were still just in a summer frock and one.
Well, we got then something like a little jackety thing, I remember, which we had on, but it was cold, it was terrible. And
nothing on your legs, for instance.
well, I had a sock, something, and I had that wooden, and then we got paper, and I put paper into that clog to keep it warmer, and we made I remember we gave half of our ration, and we got some material, and we made some sort of a glove, you know, excuse me, crude gloves. And there we were. So that was, first it started the appel. And then finally the top SS woman came along and counted us. And then after that came the work divisions and selected people for the workforce. But the workforce was a shambles. Of course, that was a mockery. That wasn't really work. It was really to make us work, to make us occupied. And there were dreaded commandos and better commandos. Now, of course, to be given work in the kitchen or work in the camp office, that was fantastic. But that was for all the people who had been there for years. We were the newcomers in such a quantity that we didn't even count anymore. We were the lowest rung of the whole system. And I remember one of the most dreadful work commandos was building rails. And I don't look to you like somebody sturdy enough, but I carried rails, because everything was done by hand. I carried rails. That's when we made the gloves, because it froze to the rail. We carried rails, we carried the material, gravel or whatever, gravel, in those, you know, those little things you have for, what is it? It's like a box, but you can do carry it. It's not wheelbarrow because you carry it.
Oh, right.
You know those
side. Yes, I know what you mean.
two handles on each side. Yes. And we carried it to there. And that was at least, that was doing something, but I can still remember before I got my promotion that one of the most dreaded things was shoveling dirt or sand or whatever it was. From one place we had to bring it to other and build it up in mounds. And we only learned much later that next day another commando would come and shovel it back to the first mound, so it was never ending. That was a work to do. And then there is another one which I remember very well. And that was, you see, the Germans looted everywhere where they went, especially in Poland. And being methodical, they kept the loot that was not personal looting, that was official looting. And around Ravensbrück, there was a place, I forgot the name now, it was called something, that was all barren land, and it was mountains, and I mean literally mountains of, for instance, pillows.
Just out in the open.
Yes, and because that was in the campaign in Poland, and I grabbed everything and the trains brought it in. And it was given us the task to sort it out further. And I am not exaggerating, Joy, but it was a mountain where a pathway was made by feet, and we went up and formed a human chain from the top to take down the pillows. It was all frozen. And we found photographs, you know how it got when they looted the house. And it had to be sorted out, the pillows, the sheets, if there was a household item. It was all sorted out. That was one of the worst jobs, because it was back-breaking, it was cold, and it was anguishing, you know. I still remember to me that was one of the worst jobs. And, well, that's how we lived. And when we got back, we got up about 3 or 4 in the morning, and we got back at nightfall from work. And at work, we only had something cold. And then when we came back, that's when we were given the hot soup, that sort of soup. And then we went to bed. There was nothing else to do. And unfortunately, perhaps for me, that one day we were taken out on a job permanently, and that was the shit commando, it was called. And that was because, you see, people got weakened and weakened, weaker and weaker. And then we had latrines somewhere around. But sometimes people were so weak that they couldn't, and there were always big long queues, so they couldn't wait, and it happened. So we had a special commando who took up all it was like stone, really, it wasn't really terrible. And you had a shovel and a pick, and you took up the things. And because this was not the most palatable work, to me it was 100 times better than any other, you got double ration. And only 2 of us were selected, Hannah and myself. And we became very friendly with a 3rd, 4th girl, Claire, who...
What does 3rd, 4th mean?
Well, Hannah, Lily, and myself were very good friends. And then we made friends, and the 4 were in the same bed with Claire, whose brother is professor of mathematics at Edinburgh University. So she was there too. So anyway, from the 4 of us, only us 2 got in. But we got double rations, and we of course brought them home, and that means that the 4 of us had 6 rations. Right. So that was a bit better. It also allowed us to walk around the camp. And this is an interjection. We were rags. We wore rags. But Lily, my friend, who was always a lady, she looked a lady in those rags with her shaven head. She had a little scarf, which I don't know how she got. And she always looked, even there, these were human beings. And to be a human in these surroundings was something. It was, we had, God's help, I would guess, but then you can't branch out into those considerations, because then you ask, why us? Why not others? We had 2 sisters who came from this same school, who were very religious, and they offered themselves to Jesus as a sacrifice for all these humans, and I both died there. In the hospital, that was the most dreaded place. There was a hospital, but nobody came out of that hospital anyway. So anyway,
they offered themselves.
Spiritually, they.
Yes, right. But they were.
So anyway, what happened, and perhaps I say this, getting too long, cut me short.
No.
Was that one day I was on my rounds with the sheet commando. And there was a new transport coming from Auschwitz. And they were called, I don't know why they called it the Canadians, they had nothing to do with Canada, but that was a special selection of prisoners who was busy in Auschwitz getting off the things from others, you know?
Stripping the...
stripping the others. They were employed for that.
When you said the others, you mean stripping live people, dead people?
Yes, live people. You know, when you arrive, you have to give all your things.
Right.
And these were the girls who were employed doing that. And in the process, they did themselves good. Like, you know, this was an essentially corrupt system where it wasn't even corrupt to steal, obviously. And they had all very good clothes and very good things. And I remember there was a mound there because they were taken away. And there was a mound there, and we were there walking, and in that mound, somehow, all of a sudden I saw a book. And you know my interest, straight away I honed in on the book. And I will never forget that book, and I will close this off to show you the book. I found a prayer book, and it was a French prayer book. And it was nothing like the prayer books at home, because it had the most beautiful pictures, the most beautiful poems. It had the Mass for every day, the text of the Mass, but it had pictures like, I must find it because we won't find it now. Now, this book was to us a life-saving force, because every morning I used to take it with me to the appel, and I stationed myself so that one of the reflector, what is it, reflector? You know, the lights, the strong lights, searchlights, would fall on that patch of the rows where I stood. And people fought to get near us because every day I would read a part of this book, or if translating it instantly from the French. And it was, you know, perhaps Jews or whoever stood there. It was not a question, but it was something more than, something higher than the terror, and something which had some human ideas in it. And I guarded that book as our force, which it was. And then time wore on, the months went by, we got lousier and filthier. And I remember one day I found a piece of torn newspaper that was at Christmas. And I read in that the Russians encircled Hungary. We didn't know anything. We didn't know what went on in the world. And I thought, oh, maybe it's nearer. And we had the planes coming over, you see, but not Ravensbrück. They didn't drop bombs on Ravensbrück, but the planes were coming. But we didn't know more or less anything of what happened. Because I could wander around, I went very often to the French bloc, because those women were wonderful. They have been there for 2 years or more. And one I got friendly with kept still that hope and that idealism which was so sadly missing everywhere, no wonder. And she told me, if you keep on, we will see a better life, you know. And I really hoped that we would. I thought we had a mission, we had to survive. And then came a commission. One day we were ordered, that was in January, and actually, perhaps I will change the method now, and I will tell you something very shortly. No, perhaps not yet, sorry. One day, one night, everything happened at night. I think it was a kind of psychological warfare, because we were together then, and everything was more frightening at night. And, I forgot one other thing, I'm being haphazard. I mentioned that when we arrived I wasn't particularly afraid of the dogs on leash, but I became very afraid indeed of them, because those dogs were there to keep order, and they were trained, like if you dropped something at work, they came there and tore into you. If you fell down, they will tear into you. So you know, that was a terrible thing.
And you saw this happening to
Oh,
people?
yes, I did. And when, for instance, an SS woman was walking along, I remember that, and a poor creator who couldn't keep his bowels was in the snow letting go. And he shot the woman straight away, you know, because that was an offense. Obviously, decent people don't do that. So I was very much afraid of the dogs. And actually, I remember, even now I'm afraid of dogs, but in Hungary, it could have been a poodle which yipped, and I jumped. I haven't.
You've got a good big dog now.
Yes. And you know, I remember when we moved in and first here and talked about having a dog, I said, one condition, no Alsatian. Of course our dog was an Alsatian, and I loved him, which shows you can't have generalizations. So anyway, after all this detour, one day in the new year, we were ordered to go on inspection. And that was I would call it a cattle sale. You see, to bolster the industry, to provide workers, the manufacturers were given the option of having people from camps going there to work. And that was cheap and expedient. But because this was diseased humanity and weakened humanity, they had to inspect the cattle. Well, it was done in a very simple way. We went to a block, which was the sanitary block or whatever it was called, and we went in front of the block and we were asked to strip. That was in January. And we had to put our things there and we had to march naked into the room. And in the room was an SS or two women, the manufacturer, the medical orderly, I don't know whom, and you had to parade before them naked and showing your hands, because there was some sort of disease which started in the hands, I can't remember what it was. So you had to show your hands and walk in front. And then they selected. Now, I was marching between Lily and Hannah and Claire, because we went in fours, and I remember they were all very strappy. I was very small and thin in those days, and they were all selected. And I, you know, straightened myself, and of course I had an operated foot on top of that, and I limped barefoot. So I walked, and I nearly walked past, and I thought I was all right. Then the SS called me back and told to the doctor, haven't you noticed she has an operation? And so I was rejected. And that night was perhaps the hardest time. When I went back, half the block was empty, and it's not only because the warmth needed was missing, but I was alone in the bed, and my friends were elsewhere. And I thought, oh, I will never survive in this place. But I did. I continued to survive, and these people were in a quarantine block for, I can't remember now how many days. Unfortunately, they were originally so weakened that by the time the supposed quarantine went up, the time went up, a number of them died.
Well, up to this point, how many of your friends had survived and in what condition?
Yes.
Or the people that arrived?
Well,
anyway.
the people who arrived, well, it was such a crowd, but I'm thinking of the people who came from that same school, the 16
Yes,
people.
right.
Well, there were two sisters I mentioned before. They both died. They got weakened, and the first one went to hospital, and going to hospital, as they discovered afterwards, is going to your death, because there was nothing there they could do for you anyway. And the second one also got weakened and got some illness and died. There was a mother with a young girl who came with us, and she died because of overexhaustion. And, you know, the ration was not enough to keep you alive. So you pulled on your resources all the time. And, of course, elderly I mean, middle-aged. She was a mother who had, the daughter was about 16, 17. Well, she didn't have enough resources. I mean, inner, not mental, but even physical resources, and mental probably. And died, and the young girl died. Because when the mother died, she just, you know, it was partly physical strength, partly luck, partly willpower. It was a strange mixture of those things. And that girl died. So, in general, I forgot to mention it, and it's good that you asked, that's how we met with this, or I personally met with this before, first time, that when the appel came, some people didn't come forward, and they were just there. And then later on it was more organized, and apparently when the appel started, they pulled out afterwards the dead bodies from these bunks. And when we went back, it was usually scaling all those dead bodies which were lined up there in the entrance. And because you were invariably beaten as you went out or in, because it was schnell, schnell, quick,
Oh,
quick.
you hadn't told me that.
Oh, we were always beaten. That was part of the regime.
What with?
Batons mostly, sometimes whips, but mostly batons. And I remember when I first was beaten, I thought, you know, I wasn't normally beaten by my parents. And I took it very badly. And again, it was Lily, my friend, who said, look, they can't hurt you. And if you don't want it to hurt you, it won't hurt you at all. So, what we noticed that more and more dead bodies were piling up in the morning. It was 10 or 20 every morning. And then we slowly discovered the camp. We couldn't go far away, even I couldn't go with my shovel. But there was a crematorium working there, and these bodies were taken to the crematorium. And so we were not, and after this selection of workers, the block was rather, not empty, but, you know, not overcrowded.
So there weren't lots more train loads coming into where you were at
But-
this stage?
No, because you see, that was practically the end. We were practically the last ones to get to Ravensbrück, because that is when the retreat was on. That was, don't forget, we were now at Christmas 44, and beginning January 45 we are at now. So the Germans were not conquering anymore and amassing people and things, but were on the retreat and on the defense, but we didn't know that. And so I was there in that terribly infested block. We always talked about it with my friends, that all these miasmatic thing, you know, the unwashed bodies, the unhealthy thing altogether, what the people started having diarrhea because of the food. I was told, and I think it was quite true, that I put bromides into our soup so that we were submissive, you know, that there were no riots and nobody uprised against them. And all this diet caused diarrhea and weakening and thing. And all right, in winter, all I had to collect was stones, really, pebbles. But what will happen when it becomes warm? What sort of epidemics will sweep us, you see?
Which had probably been in the summer before you were there.
Yes, so I was...
The other people that didn't come in with you, were
they said that, yes.
They were
typhus.
very bad condition,
Yes.
were they?
Well, we saw the ones who did survive.
That's what I mean. But
They were the gaunt people who could face it. And so I was very bereft, and they were in quarantine. And then about 2 weeks, I can't remember, I should look up my diary there. After that, one night, the candle Blokova came in again and said, look, those who would like to apply for that transport, work transport, can do so now. And there was no more, so many died, and I had to make up the numbers. There was no more comedy of medical examination, nothing. I remember I rushed in my wooden clogs and fell into that block and into the arms of my friends. And we said, oh, that's all right. Now nothing can harm us anymore. We are together again. And that's how it was. And we were together. We were taken. I changed my method here. I've threatened this before. Well, we were 16 to be taken from that Budapest school or institute or college. And we were 4 of us friends who went on this transport. And I'm the only one who returned to Hungary. I returned because I survived. Why and how, I don't know. After we were liberated, and I will tell you the story, I was liberated by the Americans in Dachau, and I promptly caught the typhus. And I was in a hospital for weeks and months, and then I was transferred to another hospital, and finally I finished up in a German military hospital, which was transformed for the ex-concentration inmates. And in that hospital, my strength started coming back. I was filmed in Dachau when I made the documentaries, because I was weighed, and I weighed about 27 kilos, which is about 4 stones. And I had pussy sores all over me, and I was shaven. I wasn't exactly Miss World material. Well, I had one, and it was stolen from me in a metro when my whole purse was stolen, unfortunately. I looked like my great-grandmother, I think. And that was not from then, but later on, when you had to have because of abuses, they gave you a photographed certificate that you were a Dachau, ex-Dachau inmate. And that was stolen. But anyway, when I started coming to, I had to lie motionless for weeks because my heart was exhausted and I didn't have the sugar content, and I had to, every second day I received a glass full of honey, which I had to eat. I can't look at honey even today, to get my strength back. And as I got my strength back, and remember I still had my missionary zeal that I had to help other people, which I did to the best of my poor abilities. But then I started to have nightmares, and every night as I got better I had a nightmare. And that whole last hospital, this military hospital, was in a convent, in a monastery, a Benedictine monastery in St. Ottilian. I'll show you the picture later. And one of the abbey, or whoever he was then, was also in Dachau and was liberated in Dachau, so he had an understanding of what it meant. And we became great friends. And one day when he came, I told him that I wanted his help now, because he knew that I was rather wanting to give help to others. And I told him that I think I will lose my mind, because I dreaded falling asleep. I always had the same nightmare, and I will tell you later what it was. And he told me, he listened to my story, and he said, I can give you only one advice: write it down. And I said, write it down? He said, yes. You will throw it out of yourself. Just write, don't think, just write whatever comes into my mind. What was the most painful to you, write it down. And I wrote down the journey, which I'm about to tell you, from Ravensbrück to the factory, which we never reached. And that did really something for me, because once I finished scribbling, I scribbled in bed. Once I finished scribbling, and ever since, I don't choose to talk about it. And probably, well, it is upsetting, surely, but I don't get sick or upset, or I really put it out of myself. And this is the story, and actually I translated it for my friends in French, into French, because one of the people at this home where I was in 1939, she died in Ravensbrück after solitary confinement, so they had this interest in Ravensbrück, and I wrote it to them. And a brother of a friend there published it in a French paper. So this is the French translation. When I read it, it's a very juvenile, but still, it is the story of those weeks, 16 days, I think it was. I have to look back. So here it is. Now, to give you away the happy ending, another part of it, you asked me what happened to this. Yes. Now, this is the saddest part then.
This being the prayer book.
The prayer book, yes. Perhaps I will tell you after. Well, we were taken, the four of us, to go back to the story, we were taken, the transport had to go the next day. That's why they filled up the missing numbers. And first we went to the delousing station. And this time we were all shorn. Shaven, not shorn, shaven this time. And my friend Hannah was shaven too. And she practically lost her mind. Her mind got confused. She thought, when she came out from under the barber's hand, she started muttering, I will not survive. I will not come through this. They took away my hair and I will not ever see Hungary again. Because we always kept saying, we will still pick the cherries from a tree and eat the cherry. We always evoked those things which were pleasant. And she kept saying that, and her mind really clouded over them. Then we were put into new clothes, new, fresh. Taken away the old ones. But unfortunately, they also did crawl with lice, as we discovered later. So the change wasn't for the better. And I tried to smuggle the prayer book. We tore it into 4 pieces and put it into our shoes. And we kept it, we salvaged it as far as the leaving Ravensbrück was concerned. Now we were given 3 days ration because they calculated that the journey south would take that long. They were not lavish rations, but 3 days rations. And we were put into wagons again at 90 apiece, or how many we were. It was a mixed crowd. It was Hungarian Jews, Polish Jews, Polish non-Jews, whatever, whoever they found. And we were...
This was what month?
That was February 1945.
Pretty cold still.
Pretty cold still, but not only was it cold, but what happened that the bombardments were on, strong and well, and the train was halted all the time because priority was given to military shipments or God knows what, and we were told. And we were on the journey for 16 days with the 3 days rations. Now that journey was something which you can't even nightmare about. It was something utterly unimaginable. The confined spaces, once the night falls, you just expand, and you have everybody is demented when you are enclosed like that, and you think you can move, and you can't because you go through bodies. And then there was a woman who really became berserk, and she murdered. She threw a girl, against the wall because she wanted more space. And she just and killed, and it was just something absolutely impossible to imagine. And there were some people who knew that if this goes on like that, we will kill each other. Yes. And there was a woman, and I will never forget her, and I'm talking now haphazardly, and I don't know if I tried actually to translate it into English. And I thought I could just sit down to the typewriter, but it's more work, when you really look for expressions. I just couldn't do it by the time you came. And there was one woman, a Polish woman, who was called Franka. That's all I know about her. She was in our wagon, in our truck, and she started talking to us at the second night or third night. I have to look up which one. And she said, to all of us, she said, look, The Germans want us, that falls in very much with their plans. They want us to kill each other. And we are doing that. And we shouldn't be doing that, because we are waited for at home. And of course all the mothers and wives, and they started crying, and lamenting. And he said, and those who have nobody there to wait for them, they also have a mission. And she said that. Because we want to survive, so that we make sure that this thing, that no more will human beings shut into cattle wagons. We have to survive. And she talked, she calmed everybody, and then she started singing. And I remember that whole night, it was like a miracle. People started singing songs. And first they were mostly Polish, and the Polish Jews, they started singing in Yiddish, songs. And then Hungarians started Hungarian songs. And it was all peaceful. And when they opened the doors, next day or whenever it was, she sort of watched that we distributed water. So she really did something then, but it continued to be a nightmare. And then, of course, we didn't get rations, we didn't get water. That was the worst thing, the thirst, And we heard the bombardment. We were just locked up in that station.
Oh, it must have been terrible.
Terrible.
How long were you locked up without
16 days.
But without water?
Well, I have to look up here when we got water, and once we got something to eat. And in the meantime we went souther and souther. And then the first one to die was Hannah.
Oh, no.
She was found dead.
Oh, Ava.
And then the door wasn't open, she was just there. And then obviously because that was a whole train, the other contained corpses too. And then one morning the SS woman came in and said, any dead? Yes. So the doors opened, and there was Hannah, and she said, give me her, who can talk for her or something. And I came forward, her number, her name, and she wrote it down, and then I had to sign, and this is just something unbelievable, and I had to sign that she died with a natural death.
Ava.
I am not, and this really, I am reluctant to relate these things because they sound beyond imagination.
No, I know.
But you see, it was this system gone crazy, that I probably had to account for the 2,000 workers, I don't know how many there were.
Right.
And I had to sign that she died a natural death. And then Claire died.
Oh.
And also, as I realized later, it was also some form of typhus, which was a, not contamination, disease.
Yes.
And Lily, who was always the bright, the fantastic, and she started, I noticed she had round colored spots on her body. And I really tried, with her, because she was the last one of my friends. And Hannah was taken out in, it was Lily, I think. I have to look up, you see, it's all the years between, but it's in there. And then all of a sudden the train stopped, and it was Bayreuth. You know the Bayreuth, the Festspiele?
Yes. Baruth.
Baruth. And Lily was dead. And she was taken, there were about 5 dead by that time,
How many left in your
Very
wagon?
very few left. Oh, I would say half left. And I had to sign again that she died a natural death. And I didn't see her, she died like this. I only saw, she died like this, and I didn't have the strength. Don't think I was a muscle woman then. And she was pulled off, and I signed. And then the train went another day, I think. And then it put to a halt. We had to stumble out. We arrived. And we arrived in Burgau. That was a little town in Germany. And we were in such a debilitated state that, for instance, I couldn't go through a threshold without getting down on my knees and crawling, because I couldn't lift my foot long enough to go past the threshold. You know, what do you call that?
Doorstep.
Doorstep.
Right.
So we were not factory material at all. But fortunately, they didn't have a convenient extermination place in the neighborhood. So what I did, they put us in a little camp. All Germany was flattered with those. It was a little camp with wire all around, and actually what was written on, because the people from the nearby village came and looked at us, but it was written out, attention, Jews don't give food. You see, so they didn't dare. And you know, sometimes we found the bread thrown in, just the same. Anyway, the sun started shining a bit better by then. And I remember we didn't have to work. So
You did have some food.
crawled out, yes, I crawled out to the sun, and I suppose that sort of kept me alive. I was absolutely down in spirits.
Were you in huts or tents?
Yes, it was huts. And we continued to live there. And then one day, an SS woman arrived and called for me by name. Now that was absolutely out of the ordinary, because we were numbers at the utmost, if we were noticed at all. And I still see it even now. You know, these military uniforms, and she had a little bag, sort of, you know, the pistol and the bag. And she opened this little bag, you know, which was on the belt,
Yes.
and took out a selection of postcard-sized photos. And they were all portraits of dead heads. Well, what happened, apparently, that at Beirut, it was a great number of bodies, and the certificates and the bodies got mixed up. You just couldn't believe that.
I would. It's just
And I had to leaf through the bodies, the photos,
to match Lily up.
to match Lily up.
Oh.
And I went through, you know, and by that time we were off bromide, I would guess.
All those pictures of those bodies.
You would not believe that. And then I got to Lily, and Lily to me had always, she was not a pretty woman, but something like an angel, you know, an archangel, or a strong face and a beautiful, she was always laughing. And I saw a dead head, a terrible dead head. And I lost control, and I said, oh, you know, something like that. And she said, oh, she was quite glad. She said, oh, you recognized one, you know. And I said, yes, I did recognize her, although you made her practically unrecognizable or something, you know. And I wasn't shot dead. I mean, that was a miracle in itself. I had to sign again, and she left. And then one day, it was now very near the war, as I know from afterwards, and Burga was evacuated. And we had to march.
Where would we be in March?
Well, that was in March. And apparently, as we knew afterwards, that Himmler, who was in charge of the concentration camps, gave an order that no concentration camp inmate should fall alive into the hands of the enemy, because that was not to be desired. So they had to be concentrated into big camps which had the possibility of disposing of large number of bodies. But maybe that wasn't still then. No, that was perhaps before that. They got in new factory workers, and we had to be evacuated. And we had to march. And we marched about 3 days, I can't remember how long. And we got to another camp.
Well, you must have improved just by resting to be able to march at all.
Well, we crawled. It wasn't far away. It was very near. Actually, when we went back to Germany, I saw it was really very near. And that was Turkheim. of which we didn't know anything, obviously. And we arrived. We were total shambles, you know, really. I had a sort of a trench coat which was in tatters, and I was cold all the time with my shaven head. So what I did at one stage, I cut or tore off a piece of the trench coat and bound it around my head, which looked absolutely ravishing, a sort of a turban. And we were crawling along and got into this camp. We were given a place and we saw the inmates. And I didn't want to believe my eyes, because the inmates were having normal clothes. They looked reasonably well fed. They looked at us with as much astonishment as we looked at them. And I remember at that stage I was continually hungry, you know, hungry, sort of craving. And we were given our rations there, and I know, which was two pieces of potato and a soup or something like that for a day. And I saw that these people peeled their potatoes. This was all dirty, you know, cooked potatoes, but doesn't matter. And they peeled their potatoes and wasted the peel. And what happened, I recognized one as a school classmate of my sister. And I went up to her. She didn't recognize me, obviously. And she said she cried for 2 days after I introduced myself. And I said to her that I came here with a request because I noticed that I threw away the peel. And could she collect the peels and give it to me? And she said, but the doctor said that that's how you contract typhus, you know. And I said, but this is how I won't die. So I don't care about the typhus. And she was very nice because they had a sort of a box or something. And I collected the peels, and most probably that helped me to survive, because I got the dirty potato peels to eat. And that was a model camp, as it came out afterwards.
I see.
When I talked to her,
right.
that when the Red Cross visited, that was the one shown. Which means they got everyone got a Red Cross parcel every month, which means they had Nestle's milk, sugar, whatever. There were children born in the camp. They had a night bag, you know, what do you call that? You know, the sleeping bag to crawl into. They changed actually clothes. They washed their clothes. The commander was an SS man, gave a ball on New Year's Eve.
No wonder you couldn't believe it.
You know, when we saw human beings, she showed me photos of her family, you know, everything which was...
And were there all sorts of people from all over, a lot of countries in that camp?
No, it was a very small camp. It was nearly all Hungarians who were taken out. It was very small. It just happened to be the luck, you know, who got there. Anyway, that is where I should have said that was now very much near the end. And that is when everybody had to be concentrated onto big camps. Now, all these little camps, because there was also a hierarchy in the camp system, there were main camps, like Auschwitz was one main camp, Ravensbrück was one main camp, Dachau was the main camp here. So all these little subsidiary camps belonged to Dachau. So the idea was to concentrate all these people to Dachau, and there was another one which was called Allach, where there was, the technology existed for extermination of large number of people, which we didn't know. Anyway, some people, and then we were evacuated, and we started marching. Now that was terrible. Everybody was very weak, in my division anyway. And if you fell, you were shot. You could see that. They shot people. Now this was the end, and it was the danger that they didn't play about. And also, you see, the Germans also felt it was near the end. So I remember at one stage we went through a village, and the women came out with food for us, because they realized, probably by seeing these people, you know. And I remember on the road then I saw men for the first time. That was dreadful. And I got the shock of their lives by seeing women. You know, to me, to see those telethons in, yeah, it was terrible. I got used to women in these impossible things. And apparently they had the same terrible thing.
But what I think to ask you, what happened with the women that were pregnant in the first camp, if you were in Ravensbrück?
Well, I forgot again. All right, I don't know. I don't really know. There were experiments on women, but I don't know personally about them. I know that at one stage we were ordered into the doctors, and as I remembered my father saying, you never press ahead when you are with the military, we kept back. And the first women who came back, they were, mostly very primitive persons who just didn't know what was what. And I said, they did something funny to us. We had to open our legs, and they did something funny to us, and we didn't like it. Because I didn't know what they did, but apparently they wanted to prevent, you didn't have your periods, by the way, automatically.
Would that be...
that was automatically from the malnutrition and the stress and everything. So you didn't have that. Yes. But apparently they did something, because later on I heard that women had difficulty conceiving afterwards. So I don't know what it was. Strictly, we kept back. And it was several thousands, and they called sometimes, but we didn't press forward, and we escaped. We never went there. I mean, it didn't serve any good to my friends, but probably I had the misanthropy because I didn't go. So I don't know what happened. But in this camp, in that model camp, there were several children born.
But when you were taken originally to the camp, there weren't any pregnant girls in your group.
No, there were not.
Group that went into
but I didn't see anybody in the cabin, so I don't really know, in the truck. And so anyway, we walked. And I just wondered how long I could walk, When it was like an automatic thing, and one more step, and one more step. And I remember I don't know how I did it, but we finished up. Before last day, we were collected into trucks, and I arrived in Dachau on a truck. Now, Dachau is the most ancient concentration camp in Germany. It started to house political opponents, and it was a men's camp. We were practically the first women, apart from the prostitutes, which were kept there for the use of prominent people. But by the time we arrived, the prostitutes were evacuated. And we were the first women convoy to arrive in Dachau. And I still remember the gate, the big gate of Dachau, had the inscription, Arbeit macht frei, work liberates you, or makes you free. And it was the gates which I was used to from Ravensbrück times. And we went in, and it was the most horrible sight, because the camp was overloaded. As I said, I got all the little subsidiaries. And the streets, it was like a village. And the streets of the village, they were sitting, people in those uniforms. All right, so yes,
there's a
man around, and we were led into what we discovered later was the brothel, ex-brothel. It was empty, and it was a great joy to us, because after all the big blocks, it was small rooms, and we had 10 or 12 put into a small room, but that to us was privacy not attained before. So I was quite happy about that, but I was very pessimistic, and I heard, and then I met another convoy of women who said that they were marched around in the mountains, and they only were in there for a night, and they changed the guard, and they have to go on. And actually, I heard later, they were marched to death in the mountains. And I thought, now, what from now? I mean, I knew that I couldn't keep going another march wherever.
You didn't have any friends or any close friends left now?
No.
You really knew?
There was one woman who
Anyone left from your original 16?
No.
You were the only one?
And there was a very nice woman there who was in the wagon with us, the one Irene, she was called. And she was a very simple woman, you know, but very nice. And she was the only one
she's the one that had calmed everybody down.
No, that woman, I heard later, had the typhus like everybody of us and survived but became completely deaf. So I don't know what happened to her afterwards. And this one was in the same thing with me, and she was the only one I had a closer connection with, sort of. So I was there in that thing, and I remember I was thinking, time is up now, because I'm sure I can't survive another march. And not a very glorious end, but here we are. And then I remember I was standing, it had windows, you know, and I was standing there like half days looking out a window, and all of a sudden it was like a mighty wind, you know, a roar coming up, and all the skeleton men rushing into one direction. You know, it was like, whoo, you know, like a hurricane. And I was not comprehending at all. I was looking, and then after a while, they were all running like insane people, as they were probably. And then I came back with an American soldier on their shoulders. And that is how, apparently that was only a patrol who happened to come in and discover Dachau. And then the fighting started, because the SS, you know, they were hounding down the SS and things. And I remember women crying, oh! I said, don't be a fool. I was not afraid. I mean, what have I got to lose if American soldiers shoot outside? This is the day for the last hurrah, you know. So I was unperturbed. And I put a soldier in front of the women's block for obvious reason. And that was it, and I didn't worry. And the next day, this is also part of my funny, this is the happy end starting now, came in an American, because the next day came in the main.
What month are we into now?
We are April, end of April, that was the 30th of April, 29th of April, 45.
Right.
And on the 30th of April, when the main body of this division, or whoever it was, came in, an American officer came into our block. And I was the only one who happened to be able to speak English. And it came out that he came from New Orleans, from a French family, so we conversed in French as well. And he asked questions and I answered. And he took me out to be photographed, because, as I say, I was a sight. Now, I must also say that a lot of people died because of the kindness of the occupying American soldiers. They were so taken that they bought in the kitchens and they gave food. And people died because of that. They were not given anymore to. And fortunately, I was already ill with typhus. I didn't know. And I couldn't look at food at all, which also again probably saved my life. So anyway, he had me photographed, and when I was in Dachau 3 years ago visiting, that I showed the film and I looked, but I couldn't see myself. Probably wouldn't have recognized myself. So they photographed me, and that was a very unique experience, because he came back the following day, on the 1st of May, that was the 30th, I'm getting mixed up. Yes, 30th, he came back. And because he discovered, because I told him that I spoke German, and he said that the commanding officer of the division, or whatever you call that, is here, and he would like to have someone there who could interpret in the languages. And I said, but I can't walk, because I couldn't, I wasn't. He said, all right, well, don't worry about, oh, and of course the Americans came with the DDT.
Oh, yes.
That was fantastic. They just lifted our skirts and because of course I didn't tell you things like that when Claire died, the body practically moved with the lice that moved, you know. I mean, I shouldn't.
No.
But you know, so that was a blessing. DDT was an absolute blessing because 2 skirts up, down and finished. You know, skirts, I mean. And so he said, okay, you come with me. And I put me on a jeep and I went with the commanding officer looking around Dachau. So I have a first-hand knowledge of Dachau. Now, that was to me one of the most unnerving sights, if I can say that. You were pretty much inured, you know, of...
You've been through hell.
Yeah, but you see, I have seen the crematorium. You could see how the system developed.
I see. So you went and looked through that with
Yes,
me?
because it was first a very simple small camp. So it was practically cottage industry, you see. It was only a crematorium with 2 ovens, hand slidden in, out, all that. But then they built a new one which was push button, much more modern, much more capacity. And of course I could see that there were it showed that it was Duschraum, it was put out, you know, for shower room. But when you close the door, it was put, Achtung, beware, Lebensgefahr, life danger, gas.
Oh, that sign came for people outside.
Yeah. And so anyway, but what I found there, which I found the most terrible, and which is nearly at par with my photographs and signing the natural death,
Yes.
so it was totally in keeping, that I had, now when somebody died and was cremated in Dachau, there is as much chance that his ashes were collected as the next man's, as you can well imagine,
yes.
right? Yet, because it was mainly, except before the very end, it was political prisoners. That means they were traceable, the family. They wrote letters to families. There was a little office, which I saw, which half-written or not sent letters, where the relatives were informed that their dear relation died, and if they want his ashes, if they send so and so many Reichsmark, they can get it in a simple urn, and so many Reichsmark in a more elaborate urn. And so it was a, and you wouldn't believe that, but to me that was one of the most cynical exercises of the war.
And was this, when you said they're mostly political, you don't include, this isn't the Jewish people,
No.
This is just the political...
It was a political camp. You had all the political leaders who opposed the Nazi regime in there at one stage or the other.
Right.
It was all the left-wing people in there, or if you know, it was essentially a political camp.
Right.
And of course, because it was that, they were traceable.
Yes, yes.
So
They were
it was still there, the urns, and you know, I can well imagine how they grabbed them.
Oh, I've never heard
Handful
that.
of, no, well, no, you couldn't have, because it wasn't publicized, I think. So that was part of the
And I
thing.
suppose you saw all those terrible
And of
things
course,
I've seen
I
in
started
photographs.
shooting people there because it wasn't enough to absorb.
And did you see did you see the piles of their belongings and...
Well, I saw that way back in Rome.
Yes, but
it
I'm
wasn't.
Yeah, but you know, when you read about things like the teeth and the spectacles...
Well, I didn't.
No, you didn't.
No, I didn't see that. And, well, I knew about the soap and all this, but I didn't. So anyway, after the tour I went back and I fell ill. I had the typhus. And the Americans set up a hospital outside the house because I wasn't the only one. And I remember a big Negro came in, grabbed me, put me in the hospital. And I was in hospital, and this is not strictly thing, but since I'm in for one side, I will tell you the whole lot. I was very ill, and actually I was dying. And I looked like a rag doll, like a doll is treating me up. I looked like a rag heap. So people didn't know I would understand English. And I learned something there, that even when you think that people are very ill or dying, you can never tell whether they understand or hear or what. So anyway, I was there, and there was a visit of American doctors, and of course just the sight of pretty women, normal healthy men who didn't shout or shoot was something, you know. And we had a 2-tier beds, and I was very ill. I couldn't eat, I was just there in, I think, high temperature, and I got some injections of another, I don't know what. Anyway, one day there was a medical visit, and the nursing sister reported, and this one won't live very long. And one doctor I heard saying, she's a young thing, but, you know, I said, yes, but passed beyond her now, she won't get out of this bed. And they went past me. And I thought, here it is, and typical of me stupidity, I thought, now, if I die, I will be all rigid. And the doctor explained to the sister how to bind my hands together to take me out, you know? And I thought, if I die like this, it will be very hard for the poor sister to put my hands behind me. So I put my hands behind me, typical of me, you know. And I thought, now here, I felt very cold in the leg. And I figured out that, and I thought I was talking to them because I wanted a priest. And it didn't come out, you know, it was bang. And they said, she said something. I thought it was English, clear English, asking for a priest. It was awesome. So they left me. And I felt the cold. And I thought if that cold comes up and comes till here, that's when I finish.
Yes.
So I watched that and probably fainted, or I don't know what I did, or fell asleep. Anyway, I woke up and I was sure I was dead. And I thought, remarkable, heaven looks like the hospital. And anyway, I had that young American doctor sitting at my bedside. And apparently he came back after I finished the visit. And he refused to give me up. And he gave me transfusions and injections. I don't know what, because I don't know. Well, anyway, I came back from the dead. And I was really downcast when I heard I was to die, because I thought, I got that far and I won't see my parents again, you know. I was really disappointed at that stage. But anyway, I survived. And as soon as you lost your temperature, because it goes with very high temperature, as soon as you lost your temperature, you were taken out because it was full, you know. And I was taken from one hospital to the other. And unfortunately, I was also taken to a recovery hospital, which was an ex-military, Hungarian military hospital. It was dreadful. And I only survived that hospital because the medicine in chief declared me cured. If he hadn't declared me cured, I would have perished there.
It was
He was totally incapable. And apparently, I shouldn't have moved, and he always told me, just sit out in the sun, walk down, sit out, and I crawled. And the German doctor said afterwards that was practically killing me off. You know, I mean, it was ignorance. And I was deaf on the one ear. I mean, as an account of the typhus, as a result of the typhus, I didn't know. And I complained, and he said, you come down to the whatever ENT department, which was also him, and we will wash your ear out. And he washed, unfortunately, the other ear. But it was terrible. He had the water heated, and the orderly put it, I mean, oh yes, it was hot like anything, and I squirted it in. And I said, yes, that's good, because I didn't want it. He looked into the good ear and said, oh yes, it's much better now, you can go. And he declared me cured, you know, just as well. And that's when we were taken out of that hospital, and we were taken to St. Ottilian, which was this Benedictine monastery.
And were you still all in the same area, or?
Yes, it's still Bavaria, and it's still very near Munich. And I should show you slides, because we took pictures when I went there last. I cried like anything in that chapel. Oh, it was really, especially because Father Schrott, I told you that priest, we went there last November, October, 78. We went there in September, and he died the previous March. So I was really sorry not to have seen him again. So anyway, we were taken there, and that was the first place where it was a real hospital. You know, it was Benedictine nuns who looked after us, and German doctors. You still had the German army uniform under their white coats, but they were very good doctors, excellent doctors, and I became very friendly with them actually. And that's where I was put to bed rest, because apparently my heart was totally exhausted, and all my heart muscles were gone practically, you know. Well, you know, the resources were worked up. So I had to lie motionless for weeks, and I was given all this good food. I got 40 grams of butter I had to eat every day, and I had this insatiable appetite. I remember on biscuits I put butter about that high, and things like that. And I got transfusion and this and that and the other, and zinc sugar, grape sugar or whatever, you know, all this, and then very slowly I could get out of bed, things like that. And I was restored to the new life. And funnily enough, somebody died in the hospital. Didn't even want to go near the room, as if I hadn't been injured, but you were not. And then, of course, came the thing that I didn't know anything about anybody, you know, at home, and I didn't know what happened to Hungary.
And what time of year have you moved to now? How long did it take you?
Well, that was, I was May, it must have been June.
So about 2 months, were you?
Yes, June, July, I was there. And it was very interesting, and how should I say it, it really, I was glad that it was attached to a monastery, because I had that sort of balancing inner peace restored. And of course he gave me the advice to write down the journey, because I had a nightmare, and I perhaps say it here. As I started getting better, and I went around like a ministering angel in the day, but when I fell asleep, invariably I had the same dream every night, that I was walking in the streets of Buddha, where we were, with Lily, and she was, you know, that stride of her and marching, and all of a sudden she turned and looked at me, and it was that head which I saw in the photo, and I screamed. And every night I awoke with that scream, and I really, probably I wouldn't be so afraid of it now, but I remember that I really hated going to sleep, because I knew what was coming, and it came. And when I finished writing it down, I never dreamt it again. Never. Yes. I sort of threw it out of my, I mean, it's psychotherapy probably. And so that was that. And then I got better. And
that's when you were doing all your ministry angel?
Well, sort of, yes.
You were helping everyone else?
Well, I tried to, but, you know, it didn't amount to much, but just a word, you know, there. And when things got better, there were camps, you know, the Americans put in camps, and I decided already that I wouldn't go there if I can help it. And there was a doctor I met, and he came back, this was very near to Munich, and he came back one day and said, there is the UNRWA, you know, the United Nations Refugee, I can't remember what it was, Relief and Rehabilitation, something. And I look for a secretary in the Hungarian sector. And the person has to know German and English. And I said, really, go. And I got the job. And that was fantastic to me, because I did not want to go to a camp. And You see, the trouble was that with all the West nations, they brought their concentration camp people back. As soon as the French sent planes, the Hungarians did nothing whatsoever. And there was, you couldn't send a locomotive behind the iron, nothing was organized. Now,
and you couldn't get any information?
You couldn't get any information. And then came my biggest surprise, of which I didn't know, obviously, that when the Germans retreated, or when the Russians approached Hungary, the people who feared the Russians, or who, they didn't know what the new world would bring, you know, they went en masse with the Germans to the west. And when I went to Munich and started at this UNRWA, I couldn't believe my eyes. They were there, people who want to meet up with each other. And there were things like that. University of Budapest, this faculty, you know, en bloc. The Hungarian Opera House, staff, singers. I said, who is this?
Names some of these people.
Yes, but, you know, it was unbelievable.
Just as if half of Budapest had moved there.
Moved, and Hungary, of course. And it was an unknown world to me. It, you know. Now, I was still shaven, started sprouting, and in Dachau we got a certificate, you know, with pictures, because people wanted, in those times it was perhaps better because we got double rations or things like that, so they wanted to keep it to themselves. Anyway, this Irene, you know, I told you, I asked her if she wanted to come out with me, and she wanted to. She was in this hospital to recovery. And we got a flat in a villa, which was probably an SS flat or something, and that we got gratis. And she cooked, see, and
you went to work?
I went to work. And I remember that was those troubled times, you know. One of my boss was one day, the military police came from him, apparently he was a prominent Nazi, and disappeared, you know. So I was working there, and I remember it was full of, you know, Hungarian, Her Excellencies and His Majesties, if not Majesties, but Graces and this and that. And one day I was walking in with my potatoes in a bag, because I did my shopping before starting work in the office. I was still an inch hair, and the lady was there. I knew her. She was
there about August, September now, or what?
August,
right.
I would say. It was at the beginning of my stay in Munich, and the lady knew me as working there and said, "Where did you get the potatoes, black market?" And I said, "No, you know that as an ex-KZ, they were called concentration KZ, I get double potato rations." She said, "Aren't you lucky, my dear?"
Oh, what did you do?
I said, "Would you have said the same thing 6 months ago?" Her ladyship, or whatever she was. She said, "No, yes. So I was there, and then I realized after a few weeks and a month probably, that it was all very nice for us to be there, but we were totally cut off from everything, because if ever there was a transport organized back to Hungary, it wouldn't be, they wouldn't come to my house in Munich. It would be in one of those camps which the Americans set up. So very reluctantly I gave up my job, because I realized I got, by the way, I got an offer there to become a teacher. They set up, UNESCO, I think, UNESCO set up a school for the orphans, which was to be set up near Paris, for the orphans found in concentration camps. And I wanted to set up a school to help them, the transition. And I was invited by somebody whom I met in Munich to be on the teaching staff. And I said no after agonies, because I said I wanted first to know what happened to my family. And of course you couldn't get news, because the people who came to the West partly wanted to justify themselves. So I remember I talked to a young officer, and he said, "Don't go back, there is nobody alive. Everybody was bombarded down, there is no one there." I said, "All right, well I will see first." You know, and I sent messages home. And you see, I sent Red Cross messages, or somebody who said he would set out on foot and try his luck and go back, and I sent messages. And I was in a quandary then, what to write, because I knew that I would be together, my parents and Lily's family and Hannah's husband, who died actually, but still. And what do I say? So I just said I got separated from the others in all my messages. I got separated, which is true, but didn't elaborate. I never got any message except for one from somebody who arrived, but that was very nearly before I arrived myself. So we decided with Irene that we would move into one of those camps as the only means of taking advantage of any possibilities. Now that was awful. Those camps were absolutely awful, because people who got liberated from camps wanted nothing but live the life, and it was dreadful, and people had nothing to do. So I went in, and the first day I went to the office and I asked if I could do some work. And I gave me some work, because otherwise I couldn't have stood it, really. And we were there for a very short time when there was a transport organized for Hungary. And it was quite a feat to get back, because they didn't send the locomotives behind the iron curtains. So we had to wait at the border and Dicey think whether they would accept us, the Russians, and send us a locomotive, but they did. And we pulled into Hungary, I still remember, into Budapest, somewhere in the back sidings, and I got off, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't dare going home, because I didn't know what to find. And I got down there, and I thought, now where do I go?
Was Irene with you or not?
She was, but she wanted to go. She went straight to the station, because she was from the country, and she wanted to go home. And we lost track. I never saw her again. And I went on a tram, boarded a tram. I didn't have any money. And I told the conductress that I didn't have any money. She let me be. And the tram went past a street where my favorite aunt lived, and my grandfather, grandfather was dead, and I thought, I better go there. I couldn't face my own home, I wanted to know.
The anguish of those.
And I got down, and rang the bell. And I remember I lived on the ground floor, and on the first floor lived my cousin, who is here in Pilara, and his parents. And she came out, his mother, and oh, Eva! And you hugging it. I said, where is Edith? Aunt Edith was on the ground floor. And she said, oh, she's out shopping, So I said, and I didn't dare ask him. And she said, don't you ask about your parents? I said, yes. I didn't dare. She said, yes, they are all right.
Oh.
And I said, and so I said, where are they? In their home? Yes, good. And then my aunt came, and he said, and your uncle, don't ask about him. So I didn't. And then I met my parents, and that's how it all ended. So this is the story.
And what happened with your sister?
Well, my sister died with the first bombardment of Budapest. You see, she went to a friend. It was quite unexpected, because we lived in a fool's paradise, and we thought, God knows why, that we would never be bombarded. She went over to a friend's place, which is, Budapest is the Danube, and we lived in this side. The friend was on the other side. And air raid, and we all went down, and boom, boom, you can hear the thuds. And then we went up, and she didn't turn up. And I said, what happened? She's always late, this girl, My mother started ringing, the phone didn't answer. And no wonder, because the whole house was a direct hit. And everybody died, and it was only...
So that was long before you went away?
Oh, yes. But you see, for my mother, I was the only one. So it was lucky that I did come back for her sake.
Yes. So then you
So that's
tried
it.
to get back into your profession, but you couldn't.
Oh, yeah, I
you were too
couldn't.
late to get
I
a
was
job.
too late to get a job, and I remember there was an article in the newspaper, I must have dated from then, where it was a very controversial article, and some people said, it's no use, these people come back again, The others that I didn't feel that I can settle down here to see all the murderers, all these passions were extreme, So anyway, I wrote to him and I said, look, our national anthem says this is very shortly.
Finish, but what
Yes.
does the national anthem say?
The national anthem said that whether the fight, the hand of fate will favor you or strike you, this is the place where you have to live and die. And this is what I quoted, and I said I would like to live and do what I was trying to do, but apparently I can't get a job, and why is that? Or something like that. And I said that because of my knowledge of languages and shorthand, I could surely get a job which is better paid, because teachers were awfully badly paid in Hungary. I could get a job as a secretary and much better paid, but I feel that my vocation is to teach. And why can't I get this place to live the way I want to live? And he published my letter, and apparently my parents wanted to shield me. I got an awful lot of terrible letters saying that what a pity that Hitler didn't kill you too, and things like that, and why don't you want to take the place of a real Hungarian, and things like that. But
so this was all anti-Jewish feeling going?
Oh, it's still there. There is no question. Let us face it. Not everybody, but quite a number. And but there was, I remember I got a letter offering me a job, saying that his parents were teachers and they were all wed to poverty. I shouldn't be as foolish as that. And he has a very good solicitor's office, and he could use somebody like me. Oh. Things like that. So I finished up by working in a commercial as a secretary. And only after I went out to Paris that I got a letter from my father with an official notification that that was a year after, that I was appointed librarian in the Institute of Fish Biology or something like that.
But so after this, what did you do then between then and going back to Paris?
Well, I went to Paris because, you see, these friends of mine were absolutely marvelous. And when the postal communication started, I felt that these were the people I really would like to see again. And with great luck, I got a permission to go out. And I went out really on a holiday to see them again. And it just came that I didn't go back because I got an offer of a job from my old job in Hungary. I was offered a job in Paris, and that's how I didn't go back. But I deviated, because what I also wanted to tell you, which also belongs here, that when my parents got my message, the last message, I let Lily's family know, and I prepared her room and everything was ready. I sent her things, the sister sent her things to the dry cleaner, that everything is ready. And when I came home, I had to tell them. And nobody wanted to believe me. I thought I had the typhus. I probably, lost my mind somewhere. Because it is just not possible that I, the weak, survived and died the strong.
You only look
did
weak.
not. No, but they were strong too, you see. And I think the hardest thing, because I had a very hard defense built around me, I suppose. And ever since I wrote this diary, I didn't weep, or I didn't carry on, or you know, I talked to a girl who could never even mention it. And I could, you know, I probably had a sort of defense mechanism. And it only broke down, I will never forget, when the brother of Lily wanted to talk to me. And I was at my aunt's, my favorite aunt's, and he came there, and I steeled myself, and I told him.
Exactly what you've told me today.
More or less. Not even that. And I didn't move, you know, I just told him that. And he cried, and I didn't, you know, and he thanked me for telling him, because I thought he should know if he asked for it. And he left. When he left, I cried, and I couldn't get out of crying for a day.
Yes.
I just cried and cried. I was totally hysterical, I think.
Good.
Not hysterical, cried,
Yes,
cried, and I couldn't stop. And that was that. And I remember there was a priest who, not the father Trinda died before I got back. And I'm very sorry that I couldn't ever tell him that I was very grateful to. He thought that we would all curse him, that he couldn't save us. That's what people told him. And I'm very sorry I could never tell him that we never did curse him. And Gita, my friend, got a letter from Hannah's brother. Hannah's husband died, but Hannah's brother is the person, I just read an article not so long ago about him in the optometry journal, because I knew that he was the person who really invented or perfected the contact lens. And he is in London, at the University of London. And I read not so long ago that he died last year, and they established a memorial scholarship or something in his name. Now this brother, having been in London during the war, and when he heard that Hannah died in a camp apparently, he sent a cable to Gita saying, "Cain, where is Abel?" You understand? Which is really not her fault, you know. So, you know, things like that happen. So, last thing to say in my long story, I settled in Paris, and with a friend whom I met at this, as I told you, I wanted to go back to these people I met before the war, you know, near Grenoble. And I got this, it was an association of ex-students, sort of difficult to describe, and I got a permanent home in the Pyrenees by the end of the war. And when I got my permit and could go out in 1946, I went to their home in the Pyrenees. And there they said I would start praying that I shouldn't go back. And I said, how can I not go back? I mean, my teacher's diploma is not valid in France, and surely any French girl can speak better than I can. They won't have any use for me here. And sure enough, I got a telephone call from my ex-boss that he was going to Paris, to the same firm, Paris office, but that didn't depend anymore from Hungary, you know. And would I take a job as a secretary? And I did. That's how I stayed out. And I was one of the girls in that camp, in that Pyrenees house. So when I said I was to go to Paris, and she was from Paris, and she just rang up her parents and said, you will have another daughter. And she was fantastic, really, and I came, and they were so nice to me, and I got myself a room very soon near them. It's a suburb of Paris in Colombes, and they were very nice. And there was a curé, a parish priest in this Colombes, and Marie must have talked about me or something. So anyway, he asked for me one day, and he said he had a girls group there, and I was a young girl, still reasonably young, and he said, would I like to join, and also would I like to talk to them about this, about my experiences, because so many French people, you see, it was a different setup in France from Hungary, because French people were opposed to the Germans. and not all of them, but still, the general tendency was that everybody has somebody in the family who suffered from these things, so they had a more understanding attitude. And so we talked with that curé, and he asked me questions, and somehow I mentioned to him, and it was his desk there, and the big bookshelf, and I was sitting here. And I said, and then I found a prayer book, and you know, it was something fantastic. It was in French, and it was for workers, but I've never seen a book like that. He looked like this. He said, oh, and I said, it had pictures, and you know, it had a picture of a flowering tree, and a mother with a baby. You know, women came to me and asked me to show the picture with the mother of the baby.
And before you tell me what he's obviously going to find in his bookshelf, what happened the last I heard? You tore it into four.
Oh, it was lost. It was lost in the wagon.
Yes,
you know, I never had it again. And he got up and pulled this book off his bookshelf, and he said, "Was it this book?" And I said, "It was," you know. And he said he and another priest were the authors of this prayer book, and I sent it because there were so many French prisoners, prisoners of war camps and in concentration camps, and I smuggled these books into Germany, but I never knew
if they reached anyone.
If they reached anyone. And I went there without knowing and told him.
How lovely.
Isn't it a story?
Yes.
And when I left France, you see, this is the Abbé Michonon, and it's in memory of your days of anguish and suffering, and in witnessing our deep friendship, so that near the Lord, or it's very good, that with the Lord you remember the group of the old girls of Cologne.
Right.
And that was when I set out for Australia, and this is all the girls, you know, this is the priest, Michonon, and these were
The
all
girls
the girls
in
in
your
the
class.
group.
And tell me how you came to come to Australia.
And this was my
What
sister.
happened?
See it in her school. She was blonde. She was totally different.
And tell
And
me,
very nice
tell me how
person.
you came to
This
Australia.
is a very bad
how,
picture.
How Nick got here and how your
That-
parents got here.
You don't want this to be registered anymore.
Yes, let it go.
Well, I lived in Paris, and my cousin, they came to Australia apparently. I wasn't even very much in touch with them. And the wife wrote a letter to me in 48, I think, saying, because his brother, my other cousin, is in the United States. And she wrote and said that it is really too bad that the family is so dispersed, and you have, you know, some in the States, some in Hungary, you in Paris, we in here. If you feel like joining us here, we send you a permit. Now, at that time, I wanted my parents to be with me, and they couldn't get a passport out of Hungary, and I understood that they only would give a passport for going overseas, not staying nearby. So I really wanted to go overseas, and I thought, why not? And it was a question of my boss being nominated to an overseas post in Brazil, and he said, in Argentine, and he even asked me if I wanted to go there, but that was very uncertain, and as I learned later, it fell through anyway. You were not very
No,
comfortable.
I'm right. It's just a matter of me not
And
stopping.
so I sent my photos, you know, and usually when you are not in a hurry, I got my permit in record time. And I had to delay because I didn't want to leave Paris yet, you know. And finally I did leave and came out here, and I arrived here in December 49. And on the boat, to give you the connection with Susan, on the boat there was a girl from school, married and with a son, who lived in the same direction as I did from school. She was older than I was. But we used to walk home together, and she always talked, you know, we talked to each other about everything, but she always talked in later years, about John, her love, and da da da. And here she was, married to John, and little John, the son, you see, and that was Fair, John Fair, Susan's brother.
Oh, I see.
I didn't know Susan up till that time. And so on the boat we made friends, we renewed friendship, and John, the husband, was a lovely man, really nice. So when we landed in Sydney, we sort of, kept up friendship. And then I met Susan at that place, and of course Susan, because well anyway, I was more attracted to Susan than I would have been to that girl in any case. And I met Susan, and that was our great friendship. You see? And
how did you get your parents out here?
Well, as soon as I arrived here, I applied for a permit for them. And when I got the permit, I sent the permit to them, with the net result that my father lost his job straight away, saying that he can't be trusted anymore. That was the hard times, the Stalinist times. But he didn't get the passport. And I lived in very difficult, for years. I don't know how many times I applied for the passport. I didn't get it, and finally I got it. In the meantime, I got married, and I got the passport in 54, and that was in 50. So 4 years I was struggling, and I got the passport in 54 and came out in same, straight away. And Susan was with the Burnies. They lived with the Burnies, and Susan was pregnant when I met her. And then Anne was born, and you know the story. And I spent a lot of time with them, being single, and, and I was, in a way, the success story, because I had a very great luck with my jobs. I got a fantastic, really fantastic job.
Doing what?
Well, you see, my cousin, I shouldn't be put down. But what you most need when you come to a new country, to my mind, is advice. And that I never got, not proper advice. My cousin is the greatest defeatist I've ever seen. And I said, it's no use. I said, what do you want to do? We put you down when as your profession is as a finisher, And I said, no, my camp, yes. And he said, you will never get an office job. I said, I'd rather try. And it was the boom time. So I went around, and it took me 3 days to get a job. But it took me 3 days because, silly enough, I first applied for a secretarial job. And that was stupid because, being freshly arrived in a country, you can't expect people to give you a job as a secretary. So I got the light the second day, and I applied as a typist. And then the second day, I was told that my references were too good, I will never stay as a typist. So the third day, I didn't show my references, and I got a job.
You're a slow starter, aren't you?
And then I learned. And then my cousin said, well, that's all you can hope for, I hope you realize. So I said, yes, in Europe you didn't change jobs anyway. And then about 3 weeks after that, people from the same boat came to me and asked me, because I spoke English. There was a couple who asked me if I could help them find a job. She was a dressmaker, but she couldn't speak English. So I bought the Herald for 2 tuppence, I think it was, and we went through, and she got a job. And then since I had the Herald, I looked through the ads, and I saw an ad that I wanted it's an importer firm of machinery, agricultural machinery, and I want somebody to translate French manuals of agricultural equipment. So I applied. It was Wilcox Mufflin, the big firm. I got the job.
Not surprised.
And I went home and I rang my cousin. But you realize you shouldn't move so much around. That is really more than what you could hope for. So then history repeated itself. There was a family who was called Danos. My maiden name is Danos, and they are the same name. And they asked me if I could help them find a flat, because they lived in a guest house. It wasn't very good. And it's the same thing repeated itself. I bought the Herald, we found the flat, and I read the ads, and it said that French shipping company, general manager of French shipping company wants a secretary with high speed of French and English shorthand And I thought, now sure enough, that job was deadly bore. I never had anything to do. It was really awful, you know. And I thought, why not? And I went and I got the job, and it was a fantastic pay, because I remember at that stage the basic wage, men...
What year are we now?
49 still. It was...
Well,
No, that was 50, beginning of 50 by this time, yes. Beginning of 50, and the main basic wage was $8 or 8 pounds or 8 guineas, something like that. And I got 12 guineas.
That's incredible, because I was working as a secretary for the managing director, for the chief accountant at the whole of the Unilever.
Good.
And I think I got the great wage of £5.
Yes, I know.
Which was a good
and I
wage.
got 12 guineas. And my cousin said, if it wasn't you, I wouldn't believe you. But you see, of course I didn't have overtime, that was said. And he was a slave driver. He was called a slave driver, and he was. But he was a fantastic man. He was really intellect. And his father was professor of English at the Sorbonne, and he was thoroughly bilingual. And if I'm fluent in French or English, it is due to him. He had a style, you know, he dictated. And he was fantastic. He worked me like a slave. No doubt.
Well, now, before we finish the tape, let's go back.
Look, that is not tape material.
No, yes it is. It's all relevant. No, but looking back on the whole thing you've told me today, I mean, it's quite obvious that you survived because of luck, and also because of, to a certain extent, I guess, the fact that you were protected by your friends at the beginning.
And I never
and
could
you had a
protect
faith,
them.
and you obviously had, I mean, I know you anyway, and you've got the most incredible sticking power and guts and everything else. But your faith was obviously one of the things.
Yes, I think it was.
And has that survived, or is that
waned? Now, this is a sticky question. My faith, I could say quite clearly, it has survived. But it perhaps shed the formalistic part.
And perhaps the useful needs of...
You know, which I was very... I like rituals and ceremonies, and I think that is a very much needed part of human nature. And this is really not tape material, and I may not go into it, and I won't, but perhaps I still think that I have faith. I most definitely have faith, and I miss the formal part, the outward part of which I am not active part anymore. But I think all balance is drawn up. I have faith, and I'm still the lucky one, you know.
And when you kept going all the time thinking you had a mission, how do you relate that now?
Well, that is a very, again, another hard part. I think you can put a mission, if in not so many words, but perhaps try to put a mission in anything you do. And I have to quote that French lady who had one leg. And I remember when I was there in 1939, and I was, doing the cleaning of the house. And they promoted me later on, and I was doing the purchases and giving out the clean sheets, and I took on a cleaning woman. My father said, because I probably did such a lousy work, but I had to do it. But anyway, we talked one day, and we talked about missions and things like that, and she said, they called me Paprika because my mother sent paprikas out for them to show, and they called me Paprika. And she said one day, and I always remember that she said, Paprika, it isn't the task we do, it's how we do it. And she said, I still remember, she said, if Paprika was the regent of Hungary, she couldn't do a better job than when she dusts the furniture. Depending on what she puts into it. And this is perhaps a consolation, but I still think, and anyway, I can't complain because the work I do now has some missionary quality.
Indeed, it has, indeed.
But whatever I did, I really felt, and also I think whatever I do, and it's not always what you think that your vocation is. And I think when I had my children, and you know, I don't know if it's illusion or what, but I thought that being a mother and trying to do a good job as a mother was my vocation then.
Right.
You know, so this mission, it's not necessarily heroic. I don't think it is, but so that it is.
And Ava, when you...
And I am a very lucky person.
You are, aren't you?
Let us finish it on that note, perhaps, that I'm looking at how much of the tape we have, that, you know, I don't think that life is a double bookkeeping setup, and it's not that what you have in the debit has normally be put into the credit and the book balanced neatly. But I think that if I draw the balance of my life, I have been an exceedingly lucky person, and I think I can say that for my parents, because that was perhaps the great consolation in my life, to know that their life, the last part of their life was a very happy one, and of course is due to Nick, because without him I wouldn't, how do you say it all? In all the books, you put a dedication to your husband or to your wife, without whose assistance I wouldn't be where I am. Well, that is certainly a part, and I think that I am very consciously happy. That doesn't spoil happiness, but I really, if I could do only one thing I would do, is stop the time going on, because I think it is so good. And I'm not speaking of the ease we live here, because it is a lucky country, but I think it is, I am consciously appreciating Australia for what it has given us and for what it has given our children, because you don't realize how lucky you are to have been born and brought up in this country. And we know, and you know, it's again a sidetrack, but I'm forever sidetracking, that Nick is very interested in early Australian history and the history of Sydney, and he's always lamenting that what a pity that he hasn't started that collecting books on that earlier. But you need a certain time before you can identify. And I'm really very happy and very lucky, I think, that we came to Australia. And I'm very lucky because, well, for several things. And because I found my husband here, and I have my children here, and I found a work which I love doing. So what else do you want? The preceding recording, consisting of 3 60-minute cassettes, was done in Sydney, Australia, on the 12th of September 1981. In an impromptu conversation between Joy Chester and myself, Eva Langley, I answered Joy's questions and evoked my experiences during World War II, partly in Budapest, Hungary, but mainly in German concentration camps. Although my reminiscences were not in any way prepared, and the uncharted course of the conversation reflects this spontaneity, on replaying the recording, I did not feel it necessary to edit it in any way. The only corrections which should be noted are that, of course, the Hungarian soldiers fought on the eastern and not on the western front, that the trip from Budapest to Ravensbrück took 6 days rather than 3, and that during that nightmarish transportation from Ravensbrück, Hannah's body was taken out at Bayreuth, and Lily's a few days later at Augsburg. Finally, I should like to add that at the concentration camp of Ravensbrück, I was registered as prisoner number 92,944. More than 37 years have gone by since the events discussed in the tape took place. Of the original group of 16, I am the only one to survive the concentration camp. Therefore, it falls upon me to bear witness that that shameful and by now almost unbelievable chapter of mankind's history did actually happen. I am very grateful to Joy for having prompted me to record my memories as part of living history.